Nope.
Very similar, though.
I was gonna say, like,
Just the visual.
I know, it was like
Is what I
the
mean.
beard, the height.
You're so funny. You're just cracking up. Now stop, we have to get serious now.
Ugh, I can't get through a meeting if it's serious to me.
Can't wait
Who
till
was
the
that?
one,
Wilder.
the next couple I believe.
Chunkiest he's ever been.
No, it's not, no.
No, yeah, and all my
I
babies
mean,
were just like
scheduled
skinny
C-section.
babies.
Do what you want, but
Yeah.
it's a different body aches than like.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, scheduled induction.
Okay.
Fourth percentile.
If nothing happens.
Oh, okay.
Well, your choice.
Great.
Yeah, Remy.
Might happen before I leave, that's good.
But that's
To
when
be
I
honest, it's real
January,
appealing.
so I don't know if
I can
that's
see that.
changed.
I don't know either. She says she's doing well, that's not her.
Oh,
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Everybody, welcome to the regular meeting of the Traverse City Planning Commission. As always, we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. Roll call.
Commissioner Deturi,
Here?
Commissioner Hershey,
Here.
Commissioner O'Brien,
Present.
Commissioner Heller,
Here.
Commissioner McGillivary,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Swanson,
Here.
Commissioner Cameron,
Present.
and Commissioner Knapp is absent tonight, and Commissioner Treadwell will wait a few minutes.
Are there any announcements?
Yeah, so the only announcement I have today is an introduction of Maxwell Cameron. So the Planning Commission, as you know, amended their bylaws to create a new non-voting position served by the county's new community development coordinator. So Maxwell has been hired in that position. I know as the planning director, it was encouraging to hear the Planning Commission wanting to bring in that higher level, broader scale voice of what's happening in the county to the conversations, because a lot of the topics that we are addressing are the same topics that the neighboring townships are addressing as well. And so happy to have Maxwell here for the sake of the public. Maxwell is on as a non-voting member, has the all rights to participate in conversation and serve on committees, much like our student liaisons that we've had in the past. And so Maxwell, I thank you for your willingness to serve.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right, so we're going to move on to approval of the minutes, approval of the draft minutes of the February 4th, 2025 regular Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
Any public comment about the minutes? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. That moves us to old business. A, public hearing and the consideration of a Planning Commission initiated zoning text amendment to Chapter 1334. I don't know what just happened here.
She voted, just close that.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Sorry. Got to find it, sorry. 1334-R2 Mixed Density Residential District and possible recommendation. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. So to recap kind of the history of this, this was one of the number of small-scale changes that the Planning Commission had recommended to the City Commission back in 2023 after a number of years of researching and discussing these housing reform possibilities. The City Commission decided to move this one along with, I think, 5 or 6 others to formal introduction and then bring it back for a vote later. It did appear on the agenda. It was the last of all the items that night that they discussed. But if you recall, they didn't vote on it. They didn't make a motion. They did, you know, and I've talked with some of the city commissioners and they were kind of candid. Like, I think it just got away from us. They said it was a long meeting. There was a lot of motions and stuff like that. I don't think that was intentional because they did vote to bring it forward for a vote. And a number of planning commissioners have questioned it since then. Like, where do we stand on that one? It's kind of been like a dangling, unresolved item. So as we started talking in the fall about the goals in the planning, the master plan's 5-year action plan, this was one of them. It was brought back for discussion in January where the Planning Commission provided directions to bring it back for consideration since it was all teed up and wasn't resolved. So we've had a couple of meetings discussing that so far. So that's kind of why we are where we are right now. This one was left unresolved. So to recap, essentially what this amendment proposes is the number of dwelling units on a property, increasing it in the R2 from 2 dwelling units to 4 dwelling units, which is what was originally proposed. No other changes to what can be built in that district would be modified by this amendment. So height stays the same, number of structures that can be used for residential purposes stay the same, setbacks stay the same, the amount of impervious surface that can be occupied on the lot stays the same. So the scale of the development would have to mimic what is allowed today. It's just a matter of how the interior of those spaces gets divided in the number of independent units that could occupy it. So that's basically the gist of it. So I did put in some visuals that we created for the open house. We created a bunch of different perspectives about what is allowed currently and what would be proposed. Those are all done in SketchUp to scale, so they mimic a typical city lot of 50 feet wide by 165 feet deep, with 7-foot setbacks and approximately, I think it was an 8 or 10-foot front setback. So those are pretty standard setbacks that we have there, with the accessory buildings off the rear alley, which is what we require, especially in our historic districts. So yeah, I think that's really kind of the gist of it. So I wanted to give you the visual of what could be allowed through this amendment that you've decided to move forward. There were some questions, that you have received about parking. So that's where design decisions have to be made. The Planning Commission and the City Commission voted in 2021 to eliminate parking requirements for residential purposes. So it was determined at that time that instead of coming up with an arbitrary minimum mandatory number of spaces, they will let the property owner and developer determine the amount of parking they need to fit their use. Now, I will point out that you cannot park on the streets overnight, so if they intend for their tenants or the property owner to have cars, they need to have that accommodation on site. I will point out that parking, though, does count towards your impervious surface limit. So the more parking you add, the smaller footprint the house is. The bigger the house, the less parking you can have. So that's where there's a balancing of parking needs to actual developed structures on the property there. So again, this would limit it to 2 structures for residential purposes. You can still have an accessory structure, but no more than 2 structures for residential. So right now, we allow single-family homes with an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. We allow a duplex, which is 2 units attached, or we allow 2 detached homes on the R2. So with the proposed amendment, that would also allow, with the density going up potentially to 4, to allow a triplex with an ADU, 2 duplex units, because 2 plus 2 is 4, so 2 duplex structures, 4 units, or a quadplex. Now, it should be pointed out that once you cross into the 3 dwelling limits, you're open, or 3 dwelling units, you're now subject to a bunch of additional standards. So you have to meet fire suppression, so a lot of times triplexes and quadplexes need to be sprinkled, and all properties that have 3 or more dwelling units have to be engineered for stormwater management. So 1 and 2 family lots do not have to. So this would actually be better addressing stormwater, because the whole site would have to be into compliance to treat the water on the property and not let it run off into neighboring properties or into the right-of-way. So a couple other things that were pointed out. There has been some comments about design standards, and so I put that information in your charter that in 1968, the city at the time was proposing a property maintenance code. Yeah, the problem is I don't know how well these speakers work, so I'll try to just talk louder in general. So, okay. So in 1968, the city was proposing a property maintenance code, and a number of property owners did not want their property governed in that way, so they had a citizen-initiated charter amendment that prohibits any kind of design standards on 1 and 2 family homes. So that would be a question for the Planning Commission to consider. So within one district, if this was to be approved, you would have the same use, which is residential. You would just have different number of units. Do they warrant different types of regulatory designs. And so that's something that you guys can discuss today and determine. So once again, I'll just point out that it is in the master plan. This was specifically included in the action plan. As far as process goes, again, all amendments to a zoning ordinance start with the Planning Commission. So you guys do the heavy lifting, the deliberating. You are the ones required to hold the public hearing, and then you make a recommendation to the City Commission, and the City Commission gets the final determination. So their process per charter is that they have to first take action to formally introduce an amendment, and then the charter requires them to wait 14 days before they can actually vote on it, which every 2 weeks they have a regular meeting, so that gives them the opportunity. You may hear that process in other units of government referred to as the first reading and the second reading. So when something gets introduced, it gives the public time to process it before their elected officials take action. So with that, I will turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. I just want to touch on that charter amendment from 1968 a little bit more for anybody who's watching, that a charter amendment is a change to your city's constitution. So this happened back in 1968. And it says that no ordinance respecting standards for the construction, repair, maintenance, improvement, occupancy, lease, or sale of housing of 1 and 2 family homes can happen unless with a vote of the people. The only way to change that is if the citizens of Traverse City wanted to bring forth a petition to have this taken out of the charter, which would have a vote. So when we hear about design standards, sometimes our hands are tied because of this charter amendment from 1968. So I just wanted to make that clear. So our 2 comments or questions does anybody have? We've discussed this now several times over the 3 meetings, I believe. This is the 4th.
Not including the first round?
Yeah, that's true. You know, for Maxwell particularly, housing zoning amendments were discussed for about 3 years. And then 2 years ago, some suggestions were sent up to the City Commission. So the Planning Commission is kind of like the research and development arm of the City Commission. They say to us, we have a housing problem. Go out, do research, make some suggestions. So we made some suggestions. This one never was taken up because of a time constraint at the meeting. So there was never a decision made on it. And so we know we have a housing crisis in our town, so we're trying to bring it back up to the City Commission so they can rule one way or the other on it. So what if we do take a vote tonight, what we're voting on is to send it up to the City Commission. They are the ones that have the decision-making ability. So just wanted to give you a little background history. And tonight is a public hearing to open up and to hear from the public as well. But does anybody have any statements or questions before we open up to the public? Jackie?
Thank you. I was both concerned and a little surprised to be told that the City Commission had just overlooked an item that was on their agenda, because I know how thorough and detail-oriented our city clerk's office is in their functions. And so I dove back into the agendas and agenda packets and the minutes from both the Planning Commission meeting that authorized requesting, you know, the conversion from 2 units to 4 units. And also that was on, I think, June 6th of 2023. And then the October 16th, same paperwork from the City Commission meeting. And I couldn't find in the agenda packet or the minutes from the City Commission meeting any indication at all of the R2 to R4 conversion. There was a specific proposal related to Chapter 1334 of our ordinances, which was at that point named R2 Two-Family Dwelling District, and as a result of City Commission action was named Mixed Density Residential District, and it added the ADU use with a duplex, but, and that was reflected again in another one of our ordinances, 1368.03, where it indicated maximum density dwelling units per parcel was in R2 shifted from 2 to 3. And I'm puzzled by the idea that the city commission would have just skipped over something that was on their agenda, and sure enough, I couldn't find it on their agenda. So I just wondered what you think might have transpired between, or am I just am I just missing it? Maybe there is some evidence, an evidence trail of some kind that would show the proposal of that change and when it was made to the city commission, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I mean, it was what was introduced. It was what I presented to the commission in August of 2023, sitting over there in my PowerPoint. It was included, and they did vote to formally introduce that. And I've talked to 3 of the commissioners now who were on there, and they all said, yeah, I don't know why we didn't vote on it. They're like, one of them specifically said to me, he's like, it was a long meeting, it was an emotionally charged, I think we got tired, it was the last thing we talked about, and then we just didn't vote on it, so.
But our quite accurate paperwork doesn't show that it was even introduced. There's a memo from the interim city manager that does not include that. So I'm concerned that there were some decisions that were made
Mitch
not
wants
in a
to say
public
something.
forum.
I think Mitch has.
Yes, speaking as somebody that at the time was the city commissioner and also a planning commissioner, I can say that it was part of a large package of bills that made it from the planning commission to the city commission. And at that city commission meeting, we looked at the package of bills, and rather than going sequentially, from the start, what we did was we just took an up or down vote over whether we wanted to discuss each of those items, and then those formally got added as the agenda items. Because we knew that it would be a long meeting with a large package of bills and other business that we had to attend to. That doesn't mean that the other things couldn't be discussed, but given how long the meeting went, the items that weren't decided as, okay, this is a priority item among the large package of bills, just fell by the wayside.
Yeah. We know it was sent up, and Sean and I were at that meeting, and that's what happened. Brian?
But there's,
It's sort of a moot point.
Yeah,
It is.
It was adopted by the planning commission, sent up to the city commission. The city commission took no action. We're sending it back to the city commission.
Yeah, that's exactly
So for them
correct.
to take action on it.
Yeah.
Whether they missed it, forgot it, decided not to act on it, or push it for another day, that's all in their own minds. There was no vote taken, so there's nothing really there. It's, the question is, are we going to send it back up to them now for a vote? That's the question before us.
Correct. That is correct. Yes.
and my concern is always transparency, abiding by Open Meetings Act, and presenting the background as accurately as we can. And I would, if there is a paper trail that supports, the anecdotal information, wonderful. I would be very delighted.
Well,
I just found our paper trail from the planning commission sending it up to the city commission. So
Yes.
that's established.
And that is established.
And you're saying you can't find the one from city?
October 16th meeting where everything was approved. And I do have printouts of those, Anna, if you'd like them.
I'll go hunt it down,
Yeah,
but
we can provide you with anything we can find, but as Brian said, what's before us now, tonight, is whether or not we're going to send it back up to them. And frankly, there have been some city commissioners who have come to us saying, send it up. So that's why we're sending it up. Or
And again, I mean,
And I
I would
was at the
add
meeting.
that, and I asked them specifically, like, whatever happened with that?
You were there, too.
And,
Yes.
get it from the horse's mouth type thing, and they were like, I don't know, I think we just kind of lost track of it that night, so you can take it as it is. But you'll be able to have that conversation either way with your fellow city commissioners
at the
meeting.
time
Yeah.
when it happens. Mitch?
Yes, in much the same vein, in roughly the same time frame, the city, I mean, the planning commission revised the lighting ordinance for the city, sent it up to the city commission. The city commission had some discussion on it, but it was never a formal vote, and it was not passed. So it is something that happens, that something gets sent up and then no action ends up getting taken.
I'm simply puzzled by the difference between what was approved by the planning commission at that time and what appeared in the agenda and agenda packet for the city commission, and why there would be a discrepancy between those two.
You should
So,
talk to
sir-
the city clerk.
Yeah, but we're
Yeah,
also
this
looking at the
is not-
October 16th City Commission agenda number, go up.
It's,
Old business.
Old business, item
2G.
2G.
Yeah,
And it was approved with Mayor Lewis dissenting, being the one dissenting vote. And the description doesn't mention fourplexes. So, I think these things matter to me as a process issue, to be sure that we are being
Well-
as thorough and accurate as we can
That was a
be.
different planning commission, that was a different city commission.
and what we're suggesting now is we are going through a process right now, holding a public hearing and deciding whether or not we're going to vote to sending it up. So, yes.
I'd just like to inquire, I understand Mitch is one of the planning commissioners who has asked that it be brought forward. Who would the other ones be?
I talked to Commissioner Warner, I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to Commissioner Stanley.
I don't know what's going on.
These are the ones that were on the commission at that time.
Great, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments? And if not, I'd like to open it up for the public hearing. So we are going to officially open up the public hearing. If anybody has a comment on this, please line up and come to the microphone. State your name and address. And you have 3 minutes.
Yes.
Paul McCarthy, 401 Washington. I hope that this amendment gets sent up to the city commission. I hope they adopt it, and I hope it passes.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy. All right,
Doug
sorry.
Kimball, Spruce Street, Traverse City, Michigan. I want to bring up something from the last meeting. One commissioner said he was tired of talking about the proposed change in R2 and just wanted to vote it through. But your discussions on issues help the public understand things about the issues and about how you come to your decisions. And residents should understand how you come to your decisions that affect our lives. So please continue the discussions. Don't cut them off. Also, at the last meeting, you started to discuss character as it applies to current R2 zones across the city. And I think you should recognize that these zones are very different. Some are large, historic, single-family homes, and some are already multifamily buildings on commercial streets. And some are 1,000-square-foot starter homes on small city lots. So choosing one zoning solution to encourage more density in all of the areas ignores their current environment. And so please develop zoning that reflects and preserves the character of each neighborhood as promised in your meetings with neighborhood associations. And the historic district can handle the issue of character. You know, in their code of ordinances, they're able to talk about it and try to come up with something. And related to that, and to consider the word demographics to mean redlining is wrong, because demographics is used in your master plan 50 times, 40 times in the text, 10 times miscellaneous, like table of contents, footers at the bottom of the page. And so finally, I'm going to ask that you follow the Robert's Rules of Order. Your own bylaws call for this, yet the R2 discussion turned into a free-for-all with no attempt by the chair to restore order. So have each commissioner speak uninterrupted and when called on.
Good evening. Bill Manny, Traverse City, Michigan, 905 Bay Street. Let's see. Over a year ago, the topic was ADUs. Both rooms were filled with city residents. When it came to public comment, residents spoke at least 15 to 1 against the ADUs. Today, we are talking about the lack of affordable housing and changing the zoning. What you are proposing is affordable rental housing. It's not housing where people can buy and afford a home that they own. Other northern Michigan cities or towns are looking at Traverse City on what they don't want to become because of, and it was mentioned earlier, I didn't finish typing my notes, so I'm sad lib right now. But oh shoot, I hate when that happens. The affordable housing, it's not real estate that people will be able to buy. And I don't understand how the fourplexes or duplexes are going to be affordable. Just a few months ago, there was some of the guys over the the TC Millworks building, they flat out said, you know, the comment was, or the question was, well, let's be affordable housing. At today's labor rates, today's cost of materials, they flat out said that it wasn't going to be affordable housing. It was going to be something that was a little on the higher end. So, you know, in another case, there's, you know, at the corner of Spruce and Bay Street, there's already one non-conforming use that has been changed to another non-conforming use, allowing for a four-unit dwelling there with 2 adjacent lots, which are going to also allow for potential 2 duplexes or 4 dwellings on those pieces of property. So there's a small section of land right there where you're going to end up having 12 units and with no proposed parking on those units. But I came to the meeting at the last second today, so I didn't have my notes prepared. But you know, the residents that live here year-round, I think, really would prefer things stay the way they are with the duplexes instead of continuing on and overbuilding the city.
Thank you.
Changing it to rental property.
Next person?
Been a long time since I've been here.
Good to have you back.
This is a new microphone. I'm here tonight, though, to request that the R2 zoning districts
Adrienne,
in
do you
both
mind?
board...
Your name and
Your name and address, please.
Oh.
We know who you are.
For the record.
Adrienne Rossi, 312 West 7th Street.
Thank you.
All right, I'll start again. I'm here tonight to request that the R2 zoning districts in both Boardman and Central neighborhoods be excluded from these proposed changes. I'm only going to speak, though, for Central neighborhood because that's where I live. And I hope someone's here to speak for Boardman neighborhood as well. The recent zoning changes that you made in the R1 districts have made both the R1 and the R2 districts indistinguishable from one another. And this is definitely true in our neighborhood. The trend in both the R1 and R2 districts in central neighborhood are toward returning homes to single-family homes, but building very large garages with space over them. And I think that's very appropriate in our neighborhood. I've always looked at those big 6th Street homes and thought, those little dinky garages look kind of strange out there. And the buildings that they've built are very nice and very appropriate, and they're well taken care of, and the owner is on the property, which I do believe is very important. That change alone that you made to allow an ADU on every R1 property in the city, it has the potential to double the housing stock in this city without going to the R4 zoning in all the R2 districts. Now, the past administration used to talk about this as well, and they referred to it as the low-hanging fruit. And it always made me feel, as a resident of the R2 districts, that I was a little somehow less than anybody else, because they didn't want to tackle this anywhere else, I guess. And I always felt badly about it. And in truth, there are 14 registered neighborhoods in Traverse City, and only 6 of us, only 6, have R2 zoning. No one else in the city has it, even though there are many zones in Traverse City that rightfully could be called transition zones. Now, I'm really very sad that no one has come to our neighborhood to discuss these changes and find out how the residents feel about that. I'm also concerned that this is a business use coming into our neighborhoods. When you have 4 living units and no owner on the premises, this is a business use. And we have not faced a business use in our neighborhoods for quite some time.
Thank you, your time's up, sorry.
My time has elapsed?
Yeah, it's 3 minutes.
Well,
And we did start it over, I will say.
I had one.
But thank you for your comment.
Well, could I make a comment, because you are chairman here? When the ADUs came up for discussion, it was mentioned, people wanted the owner on the premises, and you made the comment that this would be, we wanted policing. And my impression is that people want these properties managed. They really are concerned that they're managed and managed well. And usually the problem really isn't with the people, it's with what happens because of overcrowding or misuse of the property. So please keep that in mind, that we're asking for management.
Thank you. Oop, careful.
Not used to using
Careful,
my
careful.
appliances yet. I can get it. I'm really pretty able, but.
She's so adorable. Hello.
Hello, I'm Amy Pflugheft. I live at 537 Webster Street. While I'm not speaking on behalf of the Boardman Neighborhood Association, I do indeed live there. And as someone who lives in that neighborhood and has for a long time, I am also of the mind that it would be good to exclude the historic districts from the increase in our 2 district as it's proposed. My main concern is the possibility for, as Adrin mentioned, the possibility for it to be a non-owner occupied situation that becomes really more of a business opportunity. And then, but mostly, I feel like 4 units could quickly become 8 cars that are parked at that location, even if that's not the intent. And even if there is space provided, just living in my block, the 500 block, many cars park in the city right-of-way, in the alley, for a variety of reasons, which is not legal, but that has not been policed well, and unless the city is willing to really crack down on that, I think that would be, people may have the false impression that you could have as many cars as you want, and maybe the intent would be just, 4 units. maximum would be 4 cars because people would have proximity, but that doesn't always play out. So I just want people to keep in mind that the neighborhood flavor is not 8 cars in a parking, in the back of a lot off the alley. So that would be my main concern, and I think that could be resolved by excluding the historic districts from this increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a public comment?
Hello, my name is James Reed. I'm from 2540 Orchard Circle Drive. I am a I've recently moved up here just a couple months ago as a permanent resident. I've been coming up here since I was a kid, and I've always loved Traverse City. Same thing with those above and around my age group. Many of us very much like Traverse City, not only just because of how beautiful it is, but because of its walkability and how close and compact a lot of the things are to downtown. I am in favor of the increase in the R2 zoning, and part of that reason is because despite me having a well-paying job, a fair amount of savings, I do not have a prayer of buying any form of single-family housing anywhere nearby Traverse City, and any form of increase to just housing in general will allow people like me who want to move here and invest and grow their just job prospects, opportunities to just come and live here. I would, however, advise the council to try to avoid or at least discourage the use of Airbnbs and any new buildings that will be created in this R2 zoning, as if very rich people who would come to just spend a short period of time here, they will increase the rent costs just by proximity, as has been seen in many downtowns across the country, such as New York and San Francisco. I would also encourage the addition of walkability that doesn't just include cars to said R2 zoning. That way, as the previous public speaker here said, to discourage the amount of cars on the road, because I do agree that overcrowding is a pretty big issue with any new expansion of population around these areas. So things like bike paths and sidewalks and bus stops would probably be, at least in my opinion, a good idea to add to these proposed communities.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Just so you know, Airbnbs are not allowed in the R zonings. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Heather Hudson, 119 Fair Street. I am also in favor of R2 zoning going through. In regards to affordable housing, it actually helps with that, like this man was just talking about. If you come in and you want to buy a duplex, you can use 3/4 of the second unit towards your mortgage, which helps your debt to income, which makes housing more affordable. So it can help people buy the home and have somebody living on the property to help them purchase that. I certainly understand the historic thing that was brought up. I think parking is definitely something that should be addressed, but those houses are enormous, and I know we don't want to monster all of those houses, but some of them could lend themselves to being divided, and also that gets more community in there. I know we don't want them turning into party houses, so I can totally understand why people would be concerned about that, but also those houses, some of them were built that way to be multi-unit. And they look the same from the outside. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Katie Bertodato, Traverse City resident and Central Neighborhood resident, and I am just lending my support for this proposed zoning change. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment? If not, I'm going to close public comment. Thank you very much for your comments, everyone, and bring it back to the commission. Yes, Mitch?
Yes, as you already pointed out, we do not allow any short-term rentals in these areas. But I would like to say, with regard to historic character, in both the central neighborhood, the Warden neighborhood portion, and I'd also say the Kids Creek neighborhood portion, you do have houses that are well over 100 years old, but in all three of those R2 sections, there is a very long history of multifamily residences. Whether they were built as a single-family house or built for a very large extended family, at various times in all three of those areas, houses have been divided up into 2, 3, 4 units.
The tab key to navigate
There's
and press space to toggle an option.
There's a house I walked by that happens to be an R1 in central neighborhood, right by on my way to this meeting today, that has 6 units, but you wouldn't know that from looking at the outside. It looks like a single-family house. So arguably, it is part of the historical and traditional character of those neighborhoods to have higher densities of housing. Also, we have no parking requirements, and notions that more units mean more cars is not necessarily true. That's 6plex that I mentioned. At no time have I, knowing people that live there, known more than 4 people that have at least 1 car, but there is still parking space provided for 6 tenants. So by no parking required, if that landlord and the tenants came to an agreement that they wanted less paved area and more backyard, they could do that. Speaking for myself, I have 9 boats, I have 2 bikes, but I have no cars, so I don't require an impervious space to park my vehicles.
Any other? Yes, Shay?
Can I make the motion?
You can make a motion.
I make the motion to recommend the zoning text amendment to Chapter 1334 R2 Mixed Density Residential District of the Traverse City Code of Ordinances to allow for up to 4 dwelling units per lot, with all other dimensional standards remaining unchanged, with the necessary corresponding amendment to Chapter 1368 size and area requirements be recommended to the City Commission for approval.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Are there any other comments before we vote?
Can before you vote, can I provide some points of clarification of things that were mentioned?
Yes.
For the
Do you want to
public?
start?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to get these before,
Okay.
just to help inform some of the things. So, one thing that was mentioned is wanting properties managed. That charter amendment that Debbie mentioned prohibits us from rental inspections on 1 and 2 family dwellings. However, all 3 and 4 dwelling lots, we do conduct rental inspections on, so these would be managed. I just want to point out that a duplex, a triplex, or a quadplex doesn't guarantee a rental scenario. So there's 2 duplex structures across the street from me. Each of them has been site condoed, so all of them are owner occupied. So the ownership and use are different things. They don't necessarily guarantee one or the other. And then the parking in alleys, we've heard of that. We hear about that all the time because we have code enforcement in our office. That is prohibited by state law. You can't park in the travel way of alleys. So regardless of anything local in our ordinance, that is prohibited. And the issue is the police don't necessarily patrol the alleys. So if the public is having a problem with a property owner parking in the alley in any district, let the police know so that they can, or even our code enforcement officer, they'll go over and talk to them, because sometimes people call us and he'll go and deal with those. So on the issue of the historic districts, we didn't talk about that much this time, but we did back in 2023. So you can't just raise a house in a historic district without Historic District Commission approval, and the bar is very high. It has to be demonstrated that there's no viable use in the property. I talked to my staff member who has been the staff liaison for 23 years of that board, and they've never approved a historic home in the district being torn down. So there, within those historic districts, there is a little more protection afforded to the existing character than you'll see elsewhere. And then Debbie did touch on the fact that short-term rentals are not part of this discussion at all, that they are prohibited in all residential districts, specifically the vacation home rentals. So, sorry, I just want to get that out there
Thank you for the
all.
clarification. Brian, you had your hand up first, I believe.
Well, Mr. Winter addressed half of my topic.
Okay.
I'll be briefer, but yeah, I mean, you know, so I've been trying to look at this and reading people's comments and deciding whether or not, you know, what are the main issues here. And parking is apparently an issue. But as Mr. Winter said, I mean, I've got friends who live on alleys, or, you know, don't live on the alleys, but they have alleys. You go visit. Sometimes, you know, you have people coming over, you have trailers. People park in alleys, and it's usually, you know, the owners and their visitors. But if there's issues and you don't want to call the police, call your neighborhood association. Let them make a complaint, and people get talked to or ticketed. I mean, you park overnight on city streets, you may or may not get ticketed. But I have a hard time doing an ordinance based on the fact that some people ignore the law, because some people will always ignore the law. And if we don't do things because some people may break the law, then we'll never do anything. It's like saying, well, why do we ban short-term rentals in residential? People break the law. Well, so does that mean we don't ban them? That doesn't sit with me. It doesn't make sense. Density. A lot of people have mentioned too much density, impacts on character. Density can be defined in two different ways. Okay, building size. Do we have dense buildings, or do we have a dense number of people? So, as Mr. Winters pointed out, nothing changes regarding the setbacks, the size of the buildings that can be built on lots. That is not changing. The lot coverage, so the density is not changing, just the number of people who can live in the buildings. I don't know if that's the issue for people. I don't know if it's the buildings. Some people have talked about demographics. I mean, kudos to Ms. Rossi and her papers that she has sent us. She points out that demographics does not define neighborhood character. Because when you start applying demographics to neighborhood character, you're talking about the people then who live in the neighborhood. If you don't want the character to change, that means you don't want the people who live there, the type of people, to change, and that is redlining. So I know, and I point out that you have said this many times, the type of people, demographics is not defined neighborhood character, correct? And I'm just saying, but there's also other comments tonight about how it can work that way. I don't see that as a big issue here. I don't know if, you know, more people bring more cars. Does it mean more traffic to the neighborhoods in the summer? I don't know. I mean, but I was reading some things about housing and addressing housing issues. We have a shortage of housing in this greater community. We are not going to fix it with this ordinance. But part of the thing is, you know, successful communities have to have tolerance. They have to give people the tools to make housing situations that work for them, okay? So you have to give some flexibility. I think this ordinance provides that type of flexibility that allows other options for people to create more. It can be more affordable for them. You can get a loan based on the rental income that you can garner from a duplex or a triplex alone. So, I mean, these are, so I'm generally going to support this. I will raise a question. I mean, people have talked about if you have 8 cars parked on the lot. I look at things I try to look at things relatively practical, and I can take the smallest lot we allow and cover it 100% and put 8 cars on it. And it just sort of like, well, that takes away from the building lot coverage. It causes issues. I think places where you have more parking are gonna be the larger lots. But does it make sense to have some type of screening requirement for parking on lots with more than for a parking lot of more than 4 spaces? Because if you go look at the aerial maps for most of these districts, most of these have parking for 4, 5, 6, 7 cars, even though they're only single-family homes.
My only devil's advocate remark about that parking would be, what I find more offensive is the parking that just happens off the street. So somebody can, as of right now, if they have their street entrance, their driveway off the street, they just park in what kind of looks like a front yard. So if we allow that to happen, I think it's whatever the phrase is where it's like the same. Apples and oranges, basically. Because I also don't like always looking at cars, but if we have weird cars just appearing in front yards, I don't feel like restricting cars in backyards off alleys that you might not see anyway.
Well, you have to have a driveway to park in your front yard.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, but like you said before, some
No,
people will
otherwise,
do
I don't
it
think it's allowed
illegally.
in the city.
What do you have against weird cars? Our largest private employer in the city of Traverse City is a classic car insurance company.
I know.
They have a lot of weird cars.
I put my neck out there when I made this remark. I knew it. But I also know that there are enough places that I have witnessed for like years having that kind of parking access. And it just throws off the look of things. If we're just talking purely about the looks of parking currently, that throws it off enough that I wouldn't care if
You know, I want to bring this back from a parking discussion to what's before us. Something that we haven't mentioned, but that was in our previous packet. For 85 years, 2 buildings have been allowed if they meet all the zoning code requirements in this R2 district. So that part's not changing. What is changing is the potential, like you say, the number of people inside these buildings, and that's what's before us. Are we going to send that up? You know, whether it's screening or whatever, I think is to be talked about city commission level and trying to figure that out. I mean, all we have to do is send this up to them for them to discuss it.
So I will add this, Brian, to your concern. In section 1372.05, which deals with landscaping, it does say, except for parcels exclusively with the total of 1 or 2 dwelling, parking alleys shall be screened from streets, the alley, and from neighboring properties whenever parking is developed according to the following. So if they are going to, and there's standards that follow, but so again, once you get to 3 and 4, all these additional standards start to kick in. So again, screening, stormwater management, rental inspection, all that kind of fire suppression.
So screening would be included?
Yeah.
It is included.
There's your
And you know,
answer.
and we've talked about that in ours because my 2 employees here live on the same alley and they have a single family neighbor with 2 people and they're car enthusiasts and they have 5 cars. They're appropriately parked in the back and stuff. And we're not, we don't seem to be raising concerns about the single family homes with lots of children driving and all the cars and stuff, but the potential of individually occupied units. And so that's something for the planning commission to kind of wrestle with. There seems to be like 2 sets of standards being applied to different types of housing use.
Well, we often apply different standards to different zones. So I'm okay with that. The screening question has been answered.
Thank you. Jerry, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is more of a personal anecdote, but, you know, I grew up here and left and then came back, and so I've, thinking through all this and looking at the zoning math, I lived in a rental house in the Boardman neighborhood. I lived in a non-conforming duplex in the central neighborhood with my wife when we got married. And then we somehow were able to manage to buy a house in Oak Park due to a house being split, which allowed our house to be, it was a large lot. It was split. A new house was next door. Yes, they were right out my kitchen window. not appealing, but we didn't care. We wanted our first house. So all those things that happen in my life to be able to own a house and raise a family here were all of these kind of tools that were just existing, non-conforming. So now, to me, as the city's getting bigger, there's more pressure, there's more housing. You know, we have to look at tools that can make realities like I had, as all those things were just in place. There was not discussion. I mean, I remember living in that non-conforming duplex, which is an R1B, and, you know, being like, wow, I'm surprised this is allowed, but it was just a grandfathered in. But you wouldn't know from the street. So I guess just from a personal standpoint, there's something to be said about, you know, it afforded me to be able to move back here, and, you know, now we have an opportunity to just try to, you know, allow that to happen in a more thoughtful way with the realities of, you know, 2025. So that's all I have to say.
Mitchell?
Yes, Director Winter had made a comment about increasing density of people, but arguably, especially in some of our historic neighborhoods, we have seen over the past 75 or whatever time frame you want, a decrease in the density of people. You have large, they might have been built as single-family homes, they might have been occupied at various times as multifamily housing, but overall the trend has been to smaller family units. So we do have, in the case of the 6-bedroom house across the alley from me, 30 years ago, had an 8-member extended family living in it. Now it's got a 4-person household, which is perfectly reasonable, but if they decided to have another 4-person household renting or through a condo agreement owning their ADU, that would be just returning to the previous level of density that has existed in my own lifetime.
Thank you. Any other comments? Jackie?
Just to raise a few things, we did get, all of us, a letter in from a resident who was expressing some concerns and personal experiences that actually are very synchronized with some of the conversations the last time that this subject came before the Planning Commission. And those would be loss of urban tree canopy, light pollution. Blight was referred to, but I think that's in connection with an increased potential for institutional investor ownership as opposed to, you know, owner occupied. Mentioned parking and just overall quality of life, invasion of privacy. You know, as we live closer and closer together, the expected ramifications. So I'd like to be sure those are registered and you know, part of the thought process as we consider this. Thank you.
Ryan?
Since I had experience on the City Commission and the Planning Commission, when we drafted light ordinances and tree ordinances, it was, you know, it's really, those are both, well, they went through the Planning Commission, they're really both police ordinances adopted by the City Commission. And, you know, and both times the City Commission watered them down, including exempting residential properties from almost all, if not completely all, of the tree ordinance. So, you know, that's an easy fix if you're concerned about the tree ordinance. And same thing with the lighting ordinance. You know, we can't barely even get it enforced. So it's just been one, you know, that's a question for the City Commission. I mean, I understand the concern. Someone comes in, they take out the trees, you know, we lose some tree canopy. But if it's a commercial, they have to replace those or pay into the city's tree fund. If it's residential, they don't. But that was a decision of the City Commission. And so, again, I'm kicking that back to the City Commission because I wasn't happy with the outcomes of either of those ordinances in the end. But you know, so you know, if you can't, I know you weren't on the City Commission at the time, but again, that's on the city commission.
That's right.
And I don't know if people overall want it. I mean, there's a lot of opposition to regulating trees in the residential zones. So it's unfortunate. I did want to add one more thing about character. And character is, is it the look of houses and how some houses are similar. I see a lot of architectural diversity in our neighborhoods. Sometimes you have groups of houses that are similar. Sometimes they're quite a bit different. I don't know if there's concern that, that's the way some of these buildings may look. And I thought about offering a amendment, and I discussed this with Mr. Winter, and just a very broad amendment that it must look like, they must have similar facade to other residential structures in the city. So pretty broad. He thought that was a little bit too broad. He also questioned, another number of other arguments, and said it'd be difficult to stop someone if they wanted to build a rocket ship and a banana. And I said, well, you could probably stop them from building the first banana in R2, but if they wanted to build a quad unit, but yeah, as long as somebody else built it. I'm not going to offer that. I looked at it, I wanted to address it. I don't see it as an issue and whether or not you get a residential looking facade from most of these buildings. If something comes up and people don't like it, it's going to happen, but it always happens. It happens with single-family homes. I know there's single-family homes that the neighbors all hate the way it looks. I know there's ones that people hate the color, but some people love the color.
Well, and according to the charter, you can't regulate it.
Yeah, and I
So-
know, and you could do it for tri and quadplexes, so 3 and 4 units, you could do that. But I'm not, at this point, I'm just going to support this ordinance as written. And I just wanted it on the record that we did discuss it. Unless someone feels differently and wants to, we could try to regulate it in that way. I just feel it's probably unnecessary, and I don't want to stifle architectural innovation.
It could be
Yeah, and I would
problematic.
add on that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Brian, because we did discuss it, and my points weren't opposition to the concept of regulating it, but Brian and I discussed more the logistics of administering it from a staff perspective, and that's where, again, I appreciated the broadness of it, but it, we had a good conversation, I felt, about it. It just would put us in a very subjective position to make subjective decisions that, we don't like being put in that position necessarily. We like, more objectivity, more predictable outcomes and things like that. So it was a good discussion, and I appreciated the strategic solution-based thinking as we discussed. I do want to go back to your comment about the tree canopy. So if I can read this part, so we have a minimum tree canopy requirement, so except for parcels exclusively with a total of 1 or 2 dwellings. So what you're proposing at 3 or 4 would make these parcels subject to the tree canopy ordinance, where in the R2, 45% of their lot would have to be covered by tree canopy. So if they came in with a permit, we would need a landscape plan, or a permit application. We would need a landscape plan to see where they're going to plant the trees, and the ordinance says every new tree equates to 500 square feet, so that's how we get them to that 45%. And then our zoning administrator, he'll print out the lot and then calculate the area of the existing canopy to see what their baseline is, to determine what the delta is, and therefore what they need to add. Now, it is true, our ordinance says if you can't fit the trees on your lot, then you can pay into the tree fund. But we don't allow them if they don't want to. If they can fit it on there, we make them do it. The only time that really comes into effect is downtown, because downtown allows you to have 100% coverage, but requires a 10% tree canopy. So they tend to pay into the tree fund because, frankly, the land value is so expensive downtown to give up 1/10 of it, that it just doesn't make sense to them. And then the Parks and Rec department uses that money to plant and maintain the right-of-way trees. So that's where you get most of the trees in the downtown environments.
Becky?
I just thought it might be pertinent here to note the language of the mixed-density residential district, formerly two-family dwelling district, that was approved in 2023. And it specifies that, you know, two-family or 3 dwelling units per parcel, if including an accessory dwelling unit, designed to be architecturally compatible with surrounding housing. So that statement is in our Chapter 1334.
Is that the first
Ordinance.
portion that you're looking at?
That's the introductory
So if you
portion.
go to the general provisions at the beginning of the ordinance, it states that those are not regulatory, though. So we can't hold anyone to that standard because it's just the purpose. And Brian brought that up, I think, in February or January, that line. So I just want to make sure people know that that specifically is called out as just a description and not a regulation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Requirements for
Accessory buildings over 200 square feet do then need to have similar roof pitch and architectural design.
to the existing.
Yeah, it has
To the
to
existing
fairly
house.
match, yeah.
One comment I want to make, because we hear it so much. So the Planning Commission's job is to plan for the future where, as it pertains to land use. Every housing discussion or every housing idea doesn't mean it will be affordable housing. We've never said that everything that we're bringing forth will be affordable housing. Now, our job is to provide more housing. The state of Michigan has come down with lots of incentives to help make housing more affordable, but that is under the purview of the City Commission. It's not under ours. So I just wanted to make that clear in case there's any confusion out there. So, Jackie?
I'm sorry, I don't have the text of our goals for this year. Didn't we mention affordable housing in our goals? Am I mistaken on that?
I got it.
There's more housing.
It's in the
Expand housing opportunities.
expand housing opportunities. Many housing-related zoning amendments introduced by the Planning Commission were adopted by the City Commission in 2023, addressing additional ways to expand housing choice and encourage more housing, especially for households earning below the median area income. That's all that it says.
I.e. affordable.
Some of it, yeah, but not all.
So, and I think that's important because we discussed that in August of '23 at the City Commission meeting. The housing crisis, if you will, that we're dealing with has two sides to the coin. There's the availability side and the affordability side. So the availability is really the land use that Debbie was speaking about. What can be allowed where? And that's the purview of the Planning Commission. But Debbie is right that the real affordability tools fall under the purview through subsidization of the City Commission. The Planning Commission has no authority to implement any of those MSHDA tools or the state pilot programs or anything like that. That really comes down to the City Commission. So the Planning Commission works on proposing land uses to address the availability, and then the City Commission can institute programs that exist that help address the affordability. So really the only thing the Planning Commission can do to help with affordability is through the supply and demand side. And so people have raised objections, you've heard them too. Well, if they build a new quadplex, it's going to be more expensive. 100%, new construction always costs more than old construction, right? Debbie and I talked about this afternoon. When the iPhone 16 came out this fall, which iPhone model was the most expensive? The newest one. But when the iPhone 16 came out, what did that do to all the earlier models? Their prices went down. So, you know, there's ways to look at that, and we've mentioned it. I sent it out after the last meeting at the beginning of February, the article from The Atlantic where the UCLA professor has been doing that quantitative research, and it's like, yes, as you start to address more of that supply, even on the higher end, it tends to have an effect on the overall housing ecosystem in the prices by addressing the demand constraint. So, just want to put that perspective out there.
Thank
so.
you. Any other comments? We have a motion and a second. I don't see any other comments. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
We have to do a roll call?
Yep.
Commissioner Deturi,
Yes.
Commissioner Hershey,
Yes.
Commissioner Treadwell,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Brien,
Yes.
Commissioner Heller,
Yes.
Commissioner McGillivray,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
No.
Commissioner Swanson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. All right, now we're going to move on to B, public hearing and possible action on the capital improvement plan. Mr. Winter.
Yep, so the capital improvement plan is something that is required for municipalities. It is a 6-year plan of projects. Now, there's a number of reasons that these projects rise to the list, but this is a list of projects used to help the city manager and the city commission inform their budget process, which they're actually starting this week at the staff level. This is created by staff. Most of these projects have been entered to address capacity issues, condition issues. They're either called for in plans. In some cases, there's legal regulatory requirements. I don't know if you guys are aware of, after the Flint water crisis, they had the lead and water lead replacement mandate on cities, so we have to replace all of those even though that they're privately owned. So sometimes laws get passed that require us to put projects in the CIP because they need to be made aware of the city commission, the city manager, that these are costs coming down the line. So every year this gets redone. We do every year have the opportunity at the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing. The Planning Commission's review is really focused on location, character, and extent as it relates to the master plan's vision. So it's not a technical requirement, and frankly, that's somewhat subjective, and it's up to you guys to kind of debate that. But we do have criteria internally that we use for putting projects into the CIP, such as cost thresholds, or if it's just routine maintenance and it's not extending the life of it or the capacity of it. Those just get put into each individual department's budget. But these are really the capital assets of the city that need to be maintained over time, expanded, or in some cases, new ones installed. So the list of projects was provided to the city, or the Planning Commission, at the beginning of February. We didn't quite have a quorum, so we canceled that study session, but I appreciate the questions that were sent to staff. We were able to distribute those to the relevant departments because as the planning department, we facilitate the process. We set the meetings, bring everyone together, but every department is responsible individually for entering their own projects and things like that. So we submitted those to them. We got the responses. I know Katie distributed those out to the Planning Commission. They were in the packet that did get published, I believe, for the last meeting that ended up being canceled. Katie did follow up to see if anyone had any questions of a specific staff member or if the answers provided were not adequate. We did not hear anything, so therefore we have not asked those relevant staff members to be here. But we are holding a public hearing as scheduled tonight. So Brian had the question, and there's a memo in there from the city attorney, and her and I talked a lot about that. And frankly, she said there is no like hard, she basically said it's a gray area. There isn't a line like yes or no. She does think it is best practice, and I would agree with her, to continue this, to have the opportunity as Planning Commission to weigh in on these projects and to take that master plan into consideration. Of course, some of these won't have any connection to the master plan because they're just very specific improvements that need to be done, and still making that recommendation to the City Commission. Now, we, in the past, have had 2 CIPs combined into one, so the cities and Light and Powers. Now, I will say the Light and Power CIP in our charter does say explicitly that the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on it. So that may be the basis for this historical process or practice because they were both combined into one document in the past. As we discussed in February, we have switched our software. Light and Power is not switching theirs to the same software until next year, so we have 2 separate documents. They're not combined as to one, so we felt it might be most appropriate just to have 2 separate public hearings and 2 separate actions on them. We will probably next year be back to the unified single CIP, but just because of technology transitions right now, this is the position that we find ourselves in. So,
Absolutely. All right, before we open the public hearing, does anybody have any questions or comments regarding the CIP? I want to reiterate that our job is to look at each of these projects and to see if any of them are inconsistent with the master plan. not the actual project themselves and the merits of the project, but whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the plan. Jackie?
I was going to ask for clarification. In the city attorney's memo, quoting from the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, mentioned that the projects would be shown in some way prioritized, either in order of priority or I presume any way that indicated the relative priority of the projects listed. And I wondered if you felt we had addressed that sufficiently.
You know, I think so the CIP isn't necessarily to be viewed as a prioritization list. So usually things get entered 6 years out and they slowly move up. So the city commission knows that they have 6 years to start financially planning for some of these costs that are coming down the line. You know, each project itself, each department has its own merits for why they think something might need to be prioritized ahead of one project or another in their list. You know, like for instance, I'll take the Department of Municipal Utilities. They've done a clean water study as well as a sanitary sewer study, and that created a list of prioritizations that then they've used to inform their CIP entries. So the CIP itself, the prioritization just comes from how the projects move through closer to year one, because that's when it's time to budget them. If they don't get budgeted, they just kind of stay there because there's nowhere further for them to move along. And that's why some of these projects have been on there for
a long time,
10 years. And sometimes it's the city commission that just makes decisions to reprioritize. We heard that a lot when the Madison Jefferson reconstruction, which occurred last summer, we were going through the planning phase. Those people were told 10 years prior that it was coming, like in the next couple years. But then 8th Street took prioritization, funds got moved there, but that was just city commission's action. So that's really up to the city commission to decide, as the holders of the purse strings, what they want to prioritize budgeting. This is just simply a list of projects that move through. So really what they're looking at is what is prescribed in year one, what can we afford, and what do we want to prioritize. So that's really the city commission's decision to make.
Nothing to do with planning.
So you feel that the way that the CIP is presented right now, and I didn't see any indicator of relative priorities, but you feel that we're fulfilling the intent of that enabling legislation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the city attorney is well aware of this process, and she has raised no objections, so.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Each project has a funding stream that's listed, and if the project doesn't show any funding for the 25-26 year, then it's not a 25-26 priority. And if it shows all its funding in the 25-26 year, then it's a priority for 25-26. Now, I will quote from the city attorney. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to review the projects proposed by staff and evaluate their general order of priority, that in your judgment will be needed or desirable and can be undertaken with the coming 6 years. Hence, if there's a project on there that you think is a low priority, you should ask that it be either A, moved off the list because it can't be done in the next 6 years, or you can make a motion to move it back on the list because it's not a high priority. That's your options, according to this, is, to review and prioritize it. I mean, eventually, and that's our goal, and the city commission has the option also of completely ignoring whatever we say. So.
As apparently
Yeah,
they
because
do.
there's no obligation for the city commission, and the city commission looks at available funding. You could put a road that could be a high priority, and the city commission doesn't have enough funding to do it this year. So they do a smaller road or a smaller project, push the bigger one back for 1 or 2 years, depending on how their funding plays out. So, I mean, and it's also, or coordinating with other projects. Way more information than we see, so that's more of a staff. But, we just get to make a comment, and then it moves on.
And
So
if you,
let's start the public hearing.
and if you, yeah, and if you look at what's in our packet, the planning commission's evaluation is limited to a project's consistency with the master plan in terms of location, character, and its extent. That's what we are here to discuss. So-
And it does get a little confusing with the Planning Enabling Act, because it applies to every jurisdiction throughout the whole entire state. So like when I worked in Acme Township, I was the only staff member, you know, so really the Planning Commission in these more rural townships, the act speaks to like the Planning Commission needs to do this. But if you read further in the act, it does say unless it's been delegated to the mayor, the city manager and stuff. And that's how it operates in the city because, I mean, I don't know what size diameter municipal water pipe is needed to serve, you know, like we're not experts in these individual fields. So when you work in cities that are starting to manage these complex systems of infrastructure, that's where the expertise of the staff and how they provide the project input comes into play. But then it really comes down to the city commission what they want to fund, because the planning commission can look at a project in the CIP and say, you know what, that's our lowest priority. But at the end of the day, if there's a legal mandate that the city has to do it that year, that opinion doesn't really matter. You know, like you can convey that opinion, but it doesn't mean that the city doesn't have to do it if there's a legal obligation, like in the lead and copper service lines and things like that. So it's a nuanced dance, to say the least.
I'd like to open up the public hearing. So I'm going to open up the public hearing. Is there anybody here who would like to comment on the capital improvement plan?
Justin Reed, 630 Cottage Drive, Apartment 1B. I'd like to go ahead and say there is a portion of the capital improvement project, project number 1256, which is the Tartt Bayfront Trail improvement and extension. Now, I noticed on that that it's mentioning that the extension is going to go up to Barton Park and up M37. I would persuade caution on that because since M37 is a state highway, MDOT would probably have to make the final recommendation on the easements and everything else through that one corridor up through beyond Bayfront through there. And another thing is the CIP projects, they all have FY on there, so financial year. Now, as anything else with priority is, yeah, there might be other incomes, there might be other funding, like from other resources. Excuse me. There could be resources from MDOT, there could be grants. So even if it is prioritized for FY 2025, you know, in the planning and financial aspects of that is there might be available funding from other resources, or then again, there might not be funding from other resources, so the city commission would have to knock that down and put it somewhere else. And I do want to say that one of the projects is the irrigation in there for the median for M72 and M22 and US 31. As you know, the second project is happening, the second portion of the M72 and M22 project. And the city decided that they don't want any irrigation in the median at all because they think it might be attract crossings with pedestrians and also because people might treat it like a park. Earlier there was a discussion about canopies. Well, that could be more additional canopy and more green space over there, but not necessarily a park. But anyways, that is my thing about the capital improvement project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments about the capital improvement project? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public comment. We do not have a motion on the floor.
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion to approve the capital improvements plan for fiscal years 2025 through 26 through 2030, 31 be adopted.
Second. I would like to add, though, that I did not know my question would be copied and pasted directly, and I would have used
differently
fewer question marks and exclamation points. That is all. I used a lot of them.
Editorializing.
Your
really
secret passion for
Yeah,
capital
I mean,
planning.
passion for crosswalks.
Okay, you really do.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a motion and second, more comment, Brian.
Speaking of which, I wasn't aware either, and I swear the
Surprise.
initial draft said the sidewalk was gonna be on the west side of the Garfield. Maybe I just misread it anyways. So, I will say that, I'm not gonna vote for it. I could make a bunch of motions to make changes, but I've done that before, and even when they're adopted, they're ignored at the city commission. But my biggest objections, to this are, I mean, I put a lot of questions. Parking lot P, I don't think you should be tearing down an existing building in the downtown and replacing it with surface parking.
Can you tell me where that is? I looked at a map and I couldn't find it.
It's on
I think it's that
State
little
Street.
white building, the Buckins building.
It's
Oh, yeah,
just-
yeah.
Yeah, so across from
They
the
just redid that building and then it got abandoned.
parking lot, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I can't support that. I mean, if there's support for it, I'll make a motion that it be, that replacing it with I don't know, that would be stricken. But, or if somebody else will, I'll second that. But the commission's gonna do what the city's commission's going to do. Yeah, that Grandview Parkway thing is weird, but, and the West End pedestrian way, that was just my political statement. But, and then again, I also have a hard time with the whole cemetery thing. You know, I think it's just one of I was here when it started. The whole issue started because the cemetery, Sexton, is that his title at the time?
Sexton, yep.
Yeah, closed the gate because there's so much traffic going through there. And a couple of neighbors who lived in one of the adjacent neighborhoods who are connected to NGOs in the city, you know, complained. And that's what got this whole ball rolling, and that's why it's promoted by the NGOs in the city. And it's like most things, you know, it happens because, you know, and that's how it ended up and has been pursued and pushed through here from the get-go. But it's also in our mobility plan, and I objected to it then, so I don't expect it to go anywhere. Yeah, that is a long answer to that one. I'm worried about parking lot B. I really would like to see a farmer's market structure there.
But please tell us where it's inconsistent with our master plan. That is what our role is.
Well, I don't think it meets the character of the neighborhood.
Cheeky.
You're not going to, I've raised this question before.
Yeah.
I raised it during our master planning.
Right.
I objected to it then. I'm still going to object to it now, you know, and I'm just making my comments because I up here and I get the opportunity to do it. It's, you know, and my other comment is, again, all this stuff is, you know, what you see every year. The CIP is very heavily pushed towards the center of town, both the downtown, central, Boardman neighborhoods, and the west side of town, you know. I should be happy because that is the only pedestrian-centered project going in east of Garfield, you know, so in the city. But, you know, is that little connection from the cemetery driveway, you know, to the roundabout. So maybe I should just be happy we got something. But anyways, so I'm going to vote no because I can.
Okay.
And simply
Mitchell,
as that.
thank
Sorry.
you. Do you have something to say?
Yes, speaking about the cemetery gate issue, I have personally been advocating for that for 5 years, since before I knew that Brian and Sarna live in the Cromwell Terrace neighborhood, if that's who you're referring to. Personally, I feel that merely opening that gate doesn't go far enough, but it is a step that provides good connectivity between, frankly, neighborhoods going all the way to yours to the Tart Trail without having to go along Munson Avenue and through the 8th Street and Munson intersection or the Munson and Airport Access Road intersection. In concert with that, but not part of the CIP because it's just an administrative change, there is currently procedurally going through to remove the regulation in the cemetery that prohibits riding of bikes. So it is certainly consistent with our mobility action plan to have greater connectivity through that area. Having a sidewalk that directly connects to the Tart Trail from the Cromwell Terrace neighborhood, perhaps along the existing utility easement, would similarly be consistent, but that is a lot more complicated than simply expanding a gate and having a short section of sidewalk.
Thank you. Anyone else have a comment before we vote?
He is correct. It would be better to have a link through Carmel Terrace, and we talked about that previously, but he's also correct. This is the cheaper and easier, simpler way to do it for the city. Doesn't make it the better, just the simpler and the easier.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Deturi,
Yes.
Commissioner Hershey,
Yes?
Commissioner Treadwell,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Brien,
Yes.
Commissioner Heller,
Yes.
Commissioner McGillivray,
No.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Swanson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. That takes us to C, a public hearing consideration of the Traverse City Light and Power Capital Improvement Plan. Do you have any more things to say on that, Mr. Winter?
I am even less familiar with this one. So they do this completely independent of our processes and submit it to us. So it is there for your review. We didn't really get questions on that. Brian, you did have a question. When is fiber coming to your house?
Yeah.
And so I brought that up to Light and Power at our design team meeting, and I think they said in April they should have a plan, a deployment plan of where they're going to go, but it should be done within a calendar year. So I'm going to say 14 months from now you'll have high-speed fiber.
Just like to stay on him about that.
Podcasting takes a lot of data, doesn't it?
I'm with you, Brian. I've been asking them since they rolled it out.
Yeah.
I can confirm that it is both more reliable and cheaper than Charter or Spectrum.
Before I open up the public hearing, are there any other comments on this TCLP?
We're not making a motion on this, are we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
I
got it. It's
okay, all right.
Page 58.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to open up the public hearing. Does anybody from the public have a comment on the Traverse City Light and Power CIP plan? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back for a motion.
I've got a motion to approve the capital improvements plan for, should I insert the,
It says 2520.
yeah, but motion to approve the capital improvements plan from TC Light and Power for fiscal years 2025, 2026 through 2030, 2031 be adopted.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Sorry, Katie, I just didn't want back-to-back to not have that just crammed in there a tiny bit for clarity's sake in the minutes.
Got it? Okay, so that closes all of our public hearings, and we're going to move on to our continued discussion of short-term rental regulations. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, so the Planning Commission has been having these discussions with the desire to reduce the amount of short-term rentals throughout the city. So a lot of discussions have happened over the last couple meetings that we've had here since the beginning of the year. One thing I want to point out is I put a link in there for our new short-term rental map and dashboard. So we have a temporary GIS specialist assisting Jerry, who his time has been largely occupied by the IT transition as we're moving away from the county's network and separating. So Jacob, who's been helping him, has been an asset to us, so he was able to update that map. One thing I want to point out, if you zoom into some of the multifamily properties, you will see a single dot. If you click on the dot, the record pops up, and down at the bottom it'll say like 1 of 13, and there's toggle areas, because that's where one structure might have 13 different licenses within it. So if you hit the arrows, it'll go through each of those. Am I explaining this right, Jerry, and how that kind of works? So just know that sometimes one dot may recognize or may symbolize numerous records, and you don't realize that until you click on it. So on that dashboard on the bottom left, you will see different tabs. So there's individual tabs for tourist homes, vacation homes, and they've been keeping track of the ADUs there as well, because the clerk's office also manages licenses in a similar fashion, I think on an annual basis. Is that correct, Katie, for ADUs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Sean.
Sure.
Yeah, the ADU map is, it says under construction because it's literally like still under, we're still confirming all of these in the map.
Okay.
Not under construction, like.
They're not being built,
Yes.
but the web page is under construction. Is that
Yes. Just
a
so-
404 error that's going to pop up on there? So with that, we had a comment at the public comment session, I think in early February, from Katie Berdato, a local resident. Hey, Katie, there you are. As you know, Katie operates Golden Swan Management, which oversees the management of some of the short-term rentals in town and in surrounding jurisdictions. But as she mentioned at her public comment, that she is the vice president of the Michigan Short-Term Rental Association, which works with communities on appropriate regulation. So she offered up herself to come and speak with the Planning Commission. So Debbie reached out to her as chair and has brought her here to speak today. So this is more of a chance to have a dialogue with them, since that wasn't on the agenda in the past. So with that, I'll hand it to you, and we can come back and discuss.
Thank you,
later.
Katie, for being here, and we're ready to hear your comments.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I did invite our president to come up and do like a little presentation, talk about who we are, and make some comments about how we work with municipalities to provide an easier path to short-term rental regulation. Unfortunately, she slipped on the ice, has a concussion, so there's a case for heated sidewalks. If those ever come up on your agenda, she's okay. But so we are going to keep this like a little less formal. We, as an organization, as a board, kind of went through, you know, the proposed changes from, I think it was 2018 when this topic last came up. And I would say in regards to tourist homes, we do agree that like having a high intensity, low intensity designation can make it a little bit difficult to regulate. And so the proposed change to kind of do away with the high and low makes sense to us. I know that this body is more interested in percentages as far as zoning, which if you do want to regulate short-term rentals, zoning is probably the best tool that you have to do so. If you are looking to build more housing, regulating short-term rentals via zoning isn't going to actually build you housing, but again, it's certainly a tool in your toolbox. So with the proposed changes that we could see, there are some places where, you know, industrial zones is not typically recommended for short-term rental usage, as short-term rentals is kind of a residential use, and we don't typically put residential dwellings in an industrial zone, so that's a consideration. And then the other consideration would be C3 and C4, which you know is like the downtown areas. In this community, it is a commercial zone, and there are quite a few spaces above some of these restaurants and retail stores downtown that could be transformed into something that could go back on the tax roll. And with construction costs being as high as they are, the expense of transitioning a commercial building, particularly a historic building, into a residential use can be extremely expensive, and typically only pencils out if short-term rentals are allowed in that area. We recommend that as an allowed use in a more dense downtown area, as that's typically where you want your tourist dollars to be spent. And that's where people want to be. They want to walk, they want to eat at our restaurants, go to retail stores, things of that nature. And then in regards to the development zones, we would say that's usually, you know, depends on what you as a commission, as a city would want to see in those areas as far as proposed changes to potentially go from like 100% down to maybe a 25%. And other than that, I'm just here to kind of talk about best practices in other places, what works, what maybe is more expensive and doesn't have as much of an impact. And yeah, we're here to help, so.
Questions for Katie?
How do you feel about just hard caps or percentage caps for the number allowed in conjunction with zoning?
I think that percentage caps definitely work. It depends community to community. This is part of the reason I wanted my president to be here, because I know this community pretty well. So I don't want to direct too much if I'm representing this organization and not, just a city resident. But yes, they do work, and they have worked quite well. You can see in C1 and C2 where you already have a 25% cap. So if that is your goal, you can look to the regulation that you already have in place and see how that has panned out in the last few years.
Do you think a 25% cap is appropriate for, let's talk about different districts, like the C4 districts, or do you think it should be higher?
I think that if you put a cap in the C3 and C4 districts, you are going to limit the development or redevelopment potential to get a economically obsolete space back on the tax rolls.
Would you recommend or is it common for you to see any type of caps in hotel districts for short-term rentals?
Typically not.
Thank you.
Jackie?
Do you have any data about renewal of short-term rental licenses? How much attrition there may be year to year? I've been hoping to get that information locally, but if you knew of any general trends?
Yeah, I think that your zoning administrator would have that information. I know Dave Weston keeps a pretty good eye on short-term rental activity in this community. From a market standpoint, and I believe Commissioner McGillivray has brought this up before too, we are seeing a saturation in short-term rentals, which means that they are not producing the revenue that maybe people had hoped when they were investing in that, and we're seeing some of them turn back into long-term housing, which frankly, from a personal resident standpoint, we like to see.
So in terms of statewide, the organization that you're representing, do you have
Detroit
any?
is very different from Grand Rapids, different from Traverse City, different from Charlevoix, so there is not going to be one set. What you would want to do is look at a comparable city, and Traverse City is pretty unique and frankly kind of setting the standard for the state right now.
Okay, so does your organization just not keep that kind of data, or?
We do, but my president is concussed.
Got it.
Yeah. Other questions? We have a wealth of knowledge for short-term rentals here, and so any questions? I mean, I think you've brought up some really great points so far for us to consider. Jerry, did you have something?
I'm just wondering, like in the city, we've had short-term rentals for a long time. I mean, is the reason that this is did Airbnb really change the game this big, like by creating that app? I mean, I think sometimes that's get lost. Like, why is this a problem? It's like technology entered the scene, and all of a sudden, the entire landscape changed because, again, I got married here in 2017, and Airbnb was like, I remember people couldn't find a place to stay, and that app was just starting. I think that gets lost, that the technology driving this is really what's driving. People are investing millions of dollars because there's a way to access these properties that wasn't there 10 years ago, even though some of these, even on Winona Street, there's always been a short-term rental there. But now I don't even think it's that. Is that one allowed, Brian, there on? See, but that has historically been there forever as a short-term rental, and
I don't think it's ever been allowed as a short-term rental. It was used that way, and now it's rented on 30 days rentals, but sometimes people might cancel after a couple weeks. But yeah, it's still a 30-day rental. It's like it's a block for me. I have no idea how often it gets used, who's there, what the turnover is. Doesn't matter to me. It's not an issue for the neighborhood. Neighbors don't complain. But it's been a mix, and actually the people who bought it and are using it now really did a nice job upgrading it, turning it a nice looking little location. So, but no, I know it's not a short-term rental per se. They
Yeah,
run
and
it
I-
by the month, and I think they do pretty fine running it by the month.
Yeah, and I
30
guess the
days.
point is like, once it gets a point on a map on an app, it becomes a lot more accessible than in a classified section or a bulletin board. So I just think that needs to be brought up, that technology is driving a lot of this.
Do you think COVID drove a lot of this too? So from what I felt like I saw when I worked in hospitality was that people couldn't go abroad, so they were like going to Sleeping Bear Dues, like we saw influx there during COVID. Once people could start getting out, it seemed like people were coming here more because they couldn't go, they couldn't fly, they couldn't do things. So because we saw more people here, to me it seemed like that's when short-term rentals started to increase, because that's when we needed them more. And now that's gone down as the economy and COVID isn't around, and now people can't afford as much. It feels like they are starting to go down. So I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely saw a huge boom late 2020 and through 2021, and then it's slowly been declining while the supply of short-term rental stock has been increasing. And so, I mean, it's a very simple economic issue. It's going to balance out, and people are going to either have to turn it into long-term, or I know a lot of people are starting to sell these. They bought high, interest rates were high. It's not performing the way that they wanted because of the influx of supply, and then also like downturn of demand. Yeah, people can travel other places now. There's always going to be a demand here, but that was astronomical.
So something that Commissioner McGillivray brought up that I'm also interested in was the hotel resort district caps. And then the other one that you mentioned, like C3, C4 versus the Ds. So in our new master plan, they're all in the same, I just pulled it up, commercial something. What is this? Commercial core. So they're all within that same section. I currently live in an apartment building in C4. So, they will never do this because they care too much, but that could in theory turn over. All 39 units in that building could turn over from long-term housing to short-term. They don't have any short-term rentals in that building. So if we don't do some sort of cap on that, in that same strip is the new building on State Street that is like right next to where the funeral home was. So we could foresee things happening there if we don't take action in Cs. So this is very long-winded, and I'm sorry, it was supposed to be more of a question, and then I got into my explanation. But Cs versus Ds, in my mind, yes, Cs are for commercial, but they are also supporting the district that they're within. So does it make more sense to remove the limitations in Ds, because those are like, they could be a business use in a downtown, like in a development district, which is what it's called, trying to like give and take some without just taking all, which of course everyone knows is what I want to do, but.
Yeah, I think, it really depends on what you as a board, a commission, and as a community want to see. Yes, if you're looking at a building that does not have a deed restriction against short-term rentals, and you fear that in the future it could end up being like a trail side, which we won't touch, by the way. Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a tool at your disposal to try to prevent that without a deed restriction. That's why you can make those zoning changes. So I'm not going to, with my Maestra hat on, I can't direct what you should be doing, but I will say that it's not unusual to take a look at utilizing some of these tools in that way.
So getting back to what you were talking about earlier, supply and demand with short-term rentals, just theoretically, what if we banned them outright? Everybody would still be, the ones that are in use, that are permitted, would be grandfathered in, right? So we decreased the supply, essentially. Some of them by attrition turned to long-term rental, so meets the demand. You know, the demand would come, the supply would come down, meeting the demand. Do you think that would happen, I guess is the question?
Do I think that if somebody didn't currently have a permit and you restricted them from getting one in the future, do I think that those would be used for long-term? Maybe. Or possibly second homes. You know, that's always the trade-off. We do see a lot of second homes up here, and you know, so sometimes what my company says in some of these places is we're able to keep the lights on, because at least then we can keep people going in and out. But yeah, theoretically, there are some people, again, it's like, it's owners' rights.
Yeah.
So I can't say like what people would do, but if they wanted it to be an investment and not a second home, then they would probably want to squeeze what they could out of a 30-day or more rental.
Yeah. I really struggle with this one because a lot of people have talked to me about, like, if we didn't allow short-term rentals, how many units wouldn't have been built previously?
That's definitely
that are
something
now,
to keep in
like you
mind.
pointed out, turning into long-term. But at the same time, I'm like, but I've seen other cities that are like totally gutted because they're all Airbnb. So I struggle with this one a lot, and just
Yeah.
want to point that out.
I understand. I'm raising my boys here too.
Oh, one other question. You had said that you typically stray away from short-term rentals in industrial districts. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? I think I know why, but I just want.
It's mostly because you wouldn't typically put residential homes in an industrial district, just because it's a different zoning use. And because transient or not, short-term rentals are a kind of special residential use, then we probably wouldn't see a lot in industrial zones.
Thank you.
Mitch?
Yes. Are you at all familiar with, maybe it's done, maybe it hasn't, communities that have made short-term rental licenses transferable? Say, if somebody purchased a unit in Trailside 45 and we as a city decide that's not the part of town where we want short-term rentals, but Breakwater, as another development, has a cap that's not yet reached, could a person transfer that license from one place to another?
I've frankly never heard of that. I think that it might be difficult because you're looking at ownership of one to another, but I suppose if you were looking at limiting license, maybe not based on zoning and a percentage in that way, but a number of license, and so you're no longer allowing it in this area, so somebody could potentially invest in another one. No, I haven't seen it. That's a new concept. It doesn't mean that it won't work, but I think it might be difficult.
Yeah, but new concepts, I've learned, can sound all shiny, but it's often better to find something that has been at least tried before.
Right, but Traverse City's trailblazing here.
Yes, we are.
Anyone else have any questions for Katie?
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you for yours.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're all struggling with this. We've struggled through a number of meetings with this. And would you like to go district by district and talk that way? Love it. Okay, so I'm just following the chart. We're starting with the Hotel Resort District. Right now, it's 25%.
No, that's a typo in that.
It should be 100%.
It should be 100. I think I
Oh,
pointed that out in February.
sorry.
My bad.
Never mind, 100%. Are we good with that? Right.
It's a hotel,
Yes.
resort
Yes.
district, 100%'s fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if Indigo wants to list every single room on Airbnb, they should be able to do that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay,
And many hotels do.
Yeah.
that's true.
They'll book.
They do. All right, let's go down to C1, Office Services. So you've got the, do you have the map
I
up?
do have the map. They're few and far between. I think it's just up here in
Oh,
Morgan
yeah.
Farms.
A little bit over,
Oh,
I think.
a little
Yeah.
over on Munson, a little over on Garfield. They're,
Why don't we address C1 and C2 as the same?
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that would be appropriate. You know, the master plan talks about maybe C1 and C2 being combined as one district, because C1 is pretty much an exclusive office district, which we now know that the communities across the country are dealing with this. Office districts are trying to reinvent themselves because that demand just doesn't exist as it once did.
So I'll speak to this one. I'm fine with the current 25%. If you go below 25%, then you start making all of these units that already exist non-conforming. As you saw from the letter from the city attorney, showing something that a use has been abandoned is very difficult, and the burden's on the city. So then you just create all these non-conforming uses. If you want to limit more growth in the C1, C2, I would be in favor, I'm in favor generally of a hard number cap. In other words, saying that's it, no more, or whatever. You could do it citywide, or you could do it by district. And just say, we have enough, we're not going to issue any more licenses. That would be up to the city commission. It's a police power ordinance. But I would, if we're concerned about growth in that district, then I think you should just put a hard number cap on it, or you can always put a percentage cap on it, being a percentage of the overall housing stock. So, which is something some other communities have done. They've looked at it. I think our numbers overall are a little high when you look at the percentage of the overall housing stock in the city. So I'm not opposed to putting a cap on it, but also limiting it by zoning. So anyways, that's my concern about making it more restrictive in those districts.
Can I ask a question real quick? Can we have the regular 25% cap for C1 and C2 and institute a max cap? Or is that too convoluted to have both?
I mean, it's doable. The easiest way for us to administer and have the most accurate eye on it is 25, a percentage per building, per lot. That still ends up working out to the same 25% district-wide, but for, like, when we tie it to a building, then it's easier for us to administer. We don't have to keep track of how many dwelling units are in a district, which districts can be very large and spread throughout the city, and that number's constantly fluid and moving, and so it's just hard to keep up on. And I mean, we can look in our assessing record and get one number of dwelling units we have. We can look in the census data and get a different number of dwelling units we have. So it's hard to have that exact number. I think we can be more accurate and precise, frankly, if it was a percentage of dwelling units per development.
Do we have to add that to what's here?
No, I mean,
That's
how it is-
already-
that's how it
okay,
is
okay,
today.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that's why I think we made that, we made that recommendation in there. Modifying the existing system will be a lot more easier to implement than creating a new system. That just creates a little more challenge to it.
If you want to make changes to it, I think you really would need to look at, again, how much more development potential is in C1 and C2 long-term, and two, if 25% of those became short-term rentals, would it be an issue? But again, the whole point of the 25% number that the city adopted was to encourage development, to give them an incentive.
Yeah.
So for developers to build, basically places that will have long-term rentals also.
And one thing I'll add, like, it would be easy to say, like, this district gets 25%, this district gets 50% per building, we can administer that. You could institute a hard number citywide, like, but we shall not institute or issue more than 700 licenses regardless. Where that does get challenging as the administrators of this is then, when one becomes available, who's next? We have to keep a record in a whole database, and then you get disputes of, well, I think I turned mine in before Brian, I should get the next license if it became available. So my one thing I would say with that is when you limit a commodity, the demand for it and the price, it may have an alternate effect what you're saying, you know? So I just know we did that in Acme with medical marijuana licenses that cost $2,000, and one guy came in, because it was a limited number, that created an artificial market for it. And as soon as he got it, he sold it to somebody for $65,000, you know? And I only know that because he left the wire transfer receipt in his license transfer application. So I'm like, oh, that's what, you know, so it's like we commodified that by limiting the number of it. And just something to consider there.
So are we good with the 25% on C1 and C2? So, Mitch?
Yes, echoing some of what's already said, I would be interested in a hard citywide cap, but it does create some issues, so we'd have to look at the number, look at how it's changed, and say what seems to be a print number. 25% on paper in C1 and C2 seems fine, but given their geographic distribution throughout the city, I really struggle with, because C1 and C2 include areas along Munson Avenue and Grandview Parkway that are literally side by side, sometimes wedged between hotel resort district properties that are through 100%. But it also includes corridors like Garfield and Barlow and 14th Street, where I wouldn't mind seeing more development, but I think that both for city vibrancy and for many tourists, that would be preferable to be year-round permanent housing.
Becky?
I just wonder, Mitch, I think you've talked before about an overlay district.
Yes.
Rather than using our existing zoning areas, would an overlay district accomplish some of that?
It would.
So perhaps an overlay district.
The issue then becomes, if we have a lot of licenses currently outside of the area where we want them to be, do we really have a way of filtering those out of the non-conforming status? And we have found that that is hard.
If I can suggest that, you know, combining an overlay district with a hard cap citywide and some information that would help us to anticipate the attrition rates of current licenses.
Yes.
You know, might be a combination of solutions that got us close.
Yeah.
I think the attrition rate of current licenses, as soon as you put any type of cap on it, is going to become almost zero, or so small it won't matter. I mean, now, and then it becomes a question of, can you transfer a license or not? So if you sell the property, can you transfer your license? And if you can't transfer your license, you sell your property, and the license numbers are capped, that creates but you have a use that's allowed by right. So is it allowed, or is it no longer allowed? So that gets into a kind of a funky legal question. And that's, I mean, I'd like the idea of just putting a cap on the city, but once you start doing that, then as you can't transfer licenses, it makes sense when there's no cap on the licenses. As soon as you start putting caps on it, then people start arguing it's a taking, because you've essentially taken away their grandfathered use. And I think by no longer licensing them, the use you granted to the property, now you're artificially removing it. So now do you owe them, you know, the income from that property, the value of the property? Lots of questions there.
And I will say, I mean, there are people that I have spoken to that own short-term rentals that are not currently using them as a short-term rental, but they're renewing their license because these conversations are taking place. As soon as that threat, I mean, we saw that with the tree ordinance. As soon as they started discussing prohibiting cutting down trees, people are like, I'm cutting my tree down now, you know.
Yeah,
before I
so it's
get-
came out.
So that's why I'm bringing some of this up. I think, honestly, sometimes the simplest solution can be the best. What I'm hearing is you guys want less short-term rentals, more long-term housing.
Right.
All right. The amount of short-term rentals that you have is dictated by the percentage that you're allowing. I would highly recommend focusing on leveling those percentages to what you want. That is within the system that we already have. We can't go back really and take away the ones that we've already given, so this is really a forward-looking thing. I do think 25% is a good number in most of these districts. It keeps the majority long-term, because we have heard from people in our department who live in these buildings long-term where the majority are short-term. And frankly, they say it's hell, right? It's just like a revolving door. You never know who's next to you, but it keeps the majority of the units as long-term. You know, I think the comments that you're making in the HR district, 100%, that makes perfect sense. Maybe 25 is too low in the downtown district, right? That's probably where the demand is going to be the greatest. We know that the property values are the highest, therefore people are paying the greatest amount of taxes. That's for you all to decide. I've heard before from some of you the industrial district probably isn't appropriate, and I think that's just a reflection of our pyramid zoning. So all automatically things in one district get applied to the next district plus a few extra uses.
I
But
don't
you
even think we realized it when we did that.
You know, and these are the things with that type of zoning structure that slip through the cracks. And then, you know, then you have your D1 and your D2 and D3 where, you know, those were really identified as area of development, redevelopment potential within the city. So their historic uses had ceased. You know, we had a depot, we had an iron foundry, and we had a lumber mill. So they rezoned it to reflect the kind of changes that they wanted. We've had development occurring. We have heard from the Planning Commission and public that in some of those D districts, like where Red Mill Lumber once was on, you know, near Gillis Street, that they're not pleased with that 100% that is allowed there. So, you know, if that's not the outcome you want.
Me specifically, but yes.
Well, and there's others that we've heard that too, you know. But I think it was Shay who made a really good point. We have to be careful presupposing that all these buildings that were built and occupied as short-term rentals were going to be built for long-term. And in many cases, they were only built because they could do short-term rentals.
Right.
You know, so we got to be careful with how we assign that. You know, if they weren't allowed, they probably would not have been built.
Right.
But now they are. So how do we want to address how those units are used moving forward?
Can I get back to your graph?
Do I
The
have a
chart?
graph?
Yes.
No,
this
just
chart.
the little chart.
Oh, the
Because
table,
that,
yeah.
working down the list worked really
Right.
well for me. In terms of C3, C4, can we do what we just did with C1, C2? They're pretty comparable to me. The first time we passed this, we tried to do all the Cs in the same limitation, and the city commission cut that out. They did not want to offer the carrot for C3, C4. They thought that if they offered the carrot in C1, C2, that would offset it enough. We are not seeing that, and I will go back to what I said when Katie was at the podium, that I fear my building or the brand-new building where the funeral home was could turn over. So I would love for C3, C4 to be 25%. I think 0% is kind of off the table right now, based on what it sounds like. 25% still creates non-conforming uses, which is unfortunate, but there are going to be that byproduct regardless in this situation. And it could save what is left of downtown residential units.
Mitch?
Yes.
Silence on my pitch.
Since we passed these original numbers, we also passed the first floor uses for the downtown area that restricted parking, residential, either short-term or long-term, and certain other things. So it has to be for a certain amount of depth, retail or commercial. But you end up with, especially in our downtown on Front Street, many properties that, yes, they have the storefront on the first floor, but then they may only have room for 2 units on the second floor. And so a number like 25% could be difficult in making any real change.
So to that, can I just add real
Yes.
quick? We do have it in the ordinance that if it's like 25%, you get at least 1.
Okay.
You know, but you can't get 2 unless you have 8 units.
Yes.
You know, so there is in other words, I think that goes to Brian's point. Like, it's allowed, so we have to kind of allow it, otherwise you get into this taking thing, so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But my point to the previous comment that our downtown is where people want to be. And frankly, yes, the high turnover tourist environment, that sort of thing, yes, it isn't something that you want all of the tenants in your building to be, but that might align with some of the noisier and more happening parts of our downtown. If people are actually staying to be tourists, they might not be complaining about the bar being very loud until 2 a.m. I would be in favor of, for C3, going to maybe 50%, but I don't see a point in changing C4.
At all?
At present, no.
Rude.
So I have to kind of be with, I'm kind of with Mitch on this. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't go, I would go C3, 50%. I think that's reasonable. Higher use. C4, I just don't, I don't know how many housing units we have downtown, though, you know, it's an interesting question. And I understand the concerns. I wouldn't go anything below 50% for the D4, or the C4 districts. I could consider that, but I think leave them at 100% makes more sense. As for the dropping down the line, maybe getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Oh, well, but
Let's-
you've got, I think the, you know, the the Red Mill district should be a C3 district or a C4 district. So I think it should be treated the same as the C3.
And the master
district.
plan does talk about moving the C4A, which is still the same building height as D3, but moving that a little further down west, now that that's been developed, to make it more of a unified district. So that would be consistent with the master plan.
And then they can come and ask us for rezoning to C4 if they want to do that. But right now, I would do that at 50%, and I think the ironwork should be 25%. So more, it's
Yeah.
consistent with the other districts.
Because the depot one's already at 25%.
Yes.
So,
Right.
okay, so can I just recap what I'm hearing a little bit?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm ready to hit
No.
C3 and C4 yet, because you guys are kind of across the map. But it sounds like, is D1 the Red Mill one? I don't
No,
know.
Ironworks.
That's Ironworks. So I heard Ironworks at 25. D2, which is the
Depot.
depot, that's already at 25. I didn't hear much of a change there.
No.
D3, from what I'm hearing, should probably reflect what you land on for C4, because there's a lot of consistency. It's more similar to that downtown area. I've heard
That's not that
C3, I've heard a couple
right
things
next
at
to it.
50%. C4, I've heard 50 and 100.
Right.
I think, you know, you have a different commission, but I think 25% for C3 and C4 was sent up to the city commission before, and they nixed that and kept it at 100. So
Yeah.
maybe not
50.
go as low as 25% this time. Maybe try a higher number and see if
Like
you can meet them in
50.
the middle
Like
there.
50.
Now, they could always change it like they did last time, right? I think you got to give them a starting point to have something to consider.
The only other thing I would say, as part of my pitch, is that's where all of the new housing developments are. So, like, what does that mean for all of those units? Like, if we're talking 20 years down the line and those don't have deed restrictions, as far as I know, none of them do, then we're talking Breakwater, we're talking West End Lofts, TC Lofts, Ivy, the other one. All of those could be turned over. And I get that 50% is still, I would accept 50% if I'm super outnumbered, but it's still a lot. Those buildings are huge. They have so many units in them. Ours alone is the smallest, and it has 39 units in it. So that could mean nearly 20 units could be short-term rental. Just to put that into perspective, it's a lot. That's my last pitch.
Mitch?
I know that our spreadsheet is laid out in a certain way, but perhaps there'd be an opportunity to changing from a percentage to a maximum number of units. That would mean that you can have, say, up to 4, and if you have only 4 units in your property, then they could be short-term rentals, but if you have a 39-unit development, then 35 would still have to be year-round.
Now, we're just talking C3, C4.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does the potential of office workers coming back relate to all of this for those units that are empty on those top floors that were once offices?
I don't understand the question.
It also depends on what the zoning changes that we end up adopting for both West Front Street and Union Street do, because those are areas that could be more office space, they could be more residential housing.
I mean, will we get more office space up there if,
Will it return?
Yeah.
will office space return?
You know, so like our biggest
It's possible,
employer,
but, you know, it's always gonna be, it depends on, you know, the market and what's available and what's demand. And, you know, commercial property owners generally don't make a lot of quick decisions on trends. You know, they don't convert uses of buildings overnight because, oh yeah, let's go drop 30 million in this for the short-term rental market because it's hot right now. And then, oh, let's strip it all out. And yeah, so I think that, you know, it's trying to predict what happens long-term in 20 years. I know that's our job, but on something like that, I don't think you can say we should be saving these office spaces for future use. I don't know if that's a possible.
What were you just about, you were gonna say?
well, in our town is a little unique, because we don't have a big downtown, right? We're not a huge metro area. And our largest employer of office space downtown has given up most of their buildings, and it is not gonna be because they have since hired people in different states, you know, and I don't think they're in a position of, you know, bringing them all back here. It's also hard too, for employers in our area, remote workers are a huge benefit because the workers can't afford to live here in most cases. So that's how they build their workforce, is through a lot of remote, is what we're hearing from various people and stuff like that. So,
Can you speak to Commissioner Treadwell's idea of the number that we were talking about? Like what you're, because
Again-
that would be dual mechanism, which was challenging, that
I
you
know,
were saying, but.
I mean, it's doable. I mean, it's hard for me to speak on it too, because our department doesn't do the licensing. We don't manage those, that's the clerk's office, so I'm kind of advocating for them and what those changes might mean for them. We just verify whether the zoning allows it and things like that. You know, it oftentimes, there's a long lead time to see the impacts of a zoning change, you know, so I think you can somewhat confidently move forward, kind of monitor the impacts, you know, are you getting the results with whatever you decided to land on? If not, propose another tweak to it.
Yeah.
And I bring up the ADUs. They've gone through 3 significant amendments since they were introduced, and it's just because they were right-sizing and learning as they go and figuring out if the desired outcome is actually being achieved, and in some cases it wasn't, so they made the necessary modifications and things like that. I mean, Brian's right, you know, you guys are looking into the future, but you don't know the future, so you're
No, we
always
don't.
doing
That's
your
why it's so
best
hard.
to be informed, but
Yeah.
know that everything is amendable, right,
Right.
within the zoning ordinance. So feel empowered by that whatever you land on, if it's not giving you the outcome that you want, revisit it. You can have that conversation again.
And we also want to suggest things that the city commission will seriously consider. I mean, you know, that they're not just going to say, oh, we don't like that number, like happened before, the 25% was too low. So we just talked about C3, I'm going down the row, 50%. Are most people happy with C3 at 50%? No, Jackie's not.
I am not.
Anna's not.
What if we did, sorry,
Go ahead.
like 35 or 4, or like in between the 25 and 50, so that it didn't get nixed right away at 25,
Yeah.
and it wasn't, you know, not everybody here would want to do 25, but do the middle, and then the commission might want to be like, well, we don't want to do that, but we'll do 50 and we'll get to 50, but if we start at 50 with them, they could want to do
Oh, yeah.
75, or I don't know.
So
I
are
mean,
you
I
suggesting
don't,
35% for C3?
35, yeah.
How do people feel about that?
More comfortable with 35.
C3?
Yeah.
36.7 is my personal number. So.
So
I'm
I
gonna-
think, ding, 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 I've heard 35% in
I
C3.
I can live with 35. for
Great.
That was just on C3, right?
Just
Okay.
C3.
Yeah.
Now we're moving to
Now
the
we're
more
gonna
difficult
fight on
C4.
Brian, can I ask you a question as a realtor? And I don't know if you have this information, but I've been under the impression that commercial space rents at a higher price, or leases at a higher price per square foot than, say, a residential use.
It depends
Okay.
on
Location, location, location.
You sound like a
location
realtor
and
now,
the type
Mitch.
of and the type of commercial space
Okay.
and the quality, but
Because I'm trying to understand maybe where a commercial property owner's incentive may be, right? Because if it's like, I had an office use leasing my space, paying X amount, I can only get Y from residential, but I can get closer to X for short-term rental. As we vacate this office space, are we driving people towards short-term rental because that's just the closest to the income that they could have made off of office? And I'm trying to understand that better from a real estate perspective.
And what do they have to do to convert it? How much money they're going to have to spend to convert it?
so the conversion cost is very high. And most would rather just would not pay the conversion cost. Unless, I mean, I think that's just common sense. But when you do go to the conversion cost, and then you want to get a return on the investment, your short-term rental, commercial use does produce more income than long-term, no
Because
question
they're
about
paying
it.
non-PRE regardless, so their taxes are already elevated whether they do long-term or short-term because they don't own it and occupy it
I
themselves.
mean, I've never really looked at it comparing residential use to commercial use, but, I mean, commercial use is, it's looking for high volume traffic, high traffic, and downtown office, that just depends on the client. And the incentives that are available for them. Some don't want to be downtown. Some want to be where the action is, where the people are, but they want parking. And if it's a pain for their clients to get there, then it's always a trade-off between getting, access for your clients or foot traffic. Depends on your business model. It's all over the board.
Yeah, I heard that. I was actually at State Savings Bank on Garfield yesterday talking to a lender there, and they're loving their new location. And why? She said, it's so much easier to run errands during the workday. I can just go out, get in my car, go run an errand, come back to the office. I don't have to walk to the deck and stuff. So that's an example supporting what you're saying. I think it depends on how they operate and the clients.
All right, I'm going to.
I have a C4 negotiating.
Here we go.
Tip. So far, none of the other sections we've split out. But if you look at the map, C4 is C4A, C4B, C4C. My offer would be C4C at 25%, the rest at a different number, slightly higher. Because C4C at least will have 3 or 4 really large residential units. It would have TC Lofts, it would have West End Lofts, it has the assisted living center, I can't remember the name of it. It has
Riverview
the
Terrace.
Riverview, thank you. And it has the new units going up on State. So it has a chunk of the residential, but leaves C4B and C4A out, which also each, I think, have their own large units.
And they're closer to Front Street.
And they're closer right to Front, with the exception of West End Lofts in the new Forefront building. That's on Front, but just an idea.
I like that. I think it's a good compromise. Jackie?
Well, I would advocate for the sending 25% for those, all 3 of them, to the city commission. I don't know that but what the appetite on the city commission is quite different than it was in 2018.
Could be, yeah.
And we have more experience, more lived experience with short-term rentals, and I would be bold and, propose what you believe in. Don't try to anticipate the response of the city commission.
But what do other people think about keeping them all at 25%? Or, as Anna just suggested, a different percentage for A and B?
I could agree to 25 for C, but I would like to see a higher percentage for A and B.
What percentage for A and B? Are you,
Mitch is the one that wants a higher.
Yes.
What
are you
number?
What are you thinking? Right now, it's 100.
Okay, I'd be fine with keeping it at 100, but if people want to lower it, 50%.
I'm good with 50.
I'm good with 50.
Okay.
Okay, so let me recap, because I'd like to be able to bring this back to you. So we will treat C4 individually for its different sub-districts,
Right.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so I have C4A, you guys mind just recapping, was that one?
50%.
A and B were 50.
A and B were the 50, and
And
then
C is
C was
25.
25. Okay. And I'll add, I think Jackie makes a very valid point. Yes, the city commission back in 2018, 2020 had an argument, and I understood it, that why would we restrict the percentage below 100 when we allow hotels? But there has been more lived experience, like, right? I don't think, we know that they made that argument, but also many of them, just 2 years later, didn't like how Trailside flipped, you know? So I think that made them realize, whoa, actually keeping at 100 may not be in the city's best interest in some of these districts. So it may open up new conversation because there is more observable actions that have occurred that were just hypotheticals up until that point. So appreciate the direction on going bold. So I have 25% on that. I heard D1 and D2 at 25%.
Yep.
D3 is the one that we were talking about mimicking. So that would be an extension. The plan calls for C4A. So
Yeah, it's right. It's between C4A and C3A.
What?
Directly in between those two.
Yes, but moving further west down West Front, as you get towards D3, the master plan is talking about rezoning those blocks to C4A, so I think maybe D3 should mimic C4A, is what I'm
which is
saying.
50%.
Yeah, because by extending the C4A down West Front, you're not actually increasing building height or anything like that. It's just a little bit more flexibility in the development pattern.
Does everybody agree with that?
Okay, so
I
that
also
one-
did misspeak. I think the C3A is pointing to that little orange spot. It's
Yeah, I think-
actually in between C4A and residential. I was saying this.
Oh, yeah.
My only fear is that it's really, and it is the way that, it's the same way today, it's really abrupt, that feels like. I think that's why we were trying to come up with that D3.
Okay.
But I think 50% could probably cover it.
Okay.
So I think we got it all.
So, and then I heard industrial 0%, right?
Yes.
Like we're all on.
I'd like to make the case for leaving it at 25%. I mean, like, you got Lear and you've got Cone Drive in there, just as two examples. I don't think anybody's going to do short-term rentals, but we are forward-looking. You never know.
The reason we allowed residential in the industrial districts was to put housing, worker housing, closer to employers.
Okay.
That's the only reason we did it. But now you're saying, well, let's take that housing out and turn it into, let's reduce the amount of available housing and make it short-term.
I just don't think it's going to happen. Like, Cone Drive has been there forever.
Yeah.
And they've never talked about doing residential. Lear's never talked about doing residential. I don't think it will happen. I just think leaving the opportunity there is.
I'd say in both of those properties, yes, they are industrial, but they are the largest parcel in that industrial area. And if, as I've been waiting to happen for years, Cone Drive decides, hey, we actually don't need all the parking lot that we have, they could do a lot split, and it would be a very reasonable case to rezone the property, because they're not going to put another factory there. They'd be saying, okay, is this residential, is this some other commercial, is this going to be developed as something other than our factory and our parking lot for our factory?
Could happen down the road.
So you're,
So I'm saying that rezoning is the long-term solution to that.
I would agree. I think if you look at the strip over on the east side of Garfield, that's really comparable. Like that's where Coke is, that's where Grand Traverse Machine is. Those strips of property I would love to see that rezoned also.
Yeah.
There's better uses for it.
And it's
So what are
not
you
saying that you
saying?
can't have commercial in whatever it
same
is, but
Not worth changing it.
Just keep it at 25?
I think so.
I say 0.
Oh.
Zero, so.
Okay, I'm good with 0 also. Sorry.
all right.
Misread.
Whatever,
Misread
yeah.
the direction.
All right, I'm gonna put 0 down, which I really appreciate this. This gives us the direction then to start redlining the language to bring it back to you at the next meeting to look at, so.
You need to go over it to make sure we got it, or are you good?
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Well, why did I say that? So I have HR at 100%,
Yes.
C1 and C2 at 25%,
Yep.
C3 at 35%,
Yes.
C4A and B at 50,
Yep.
C4C, D1, D2 at 25%,
Yes.
D3 at 50, and industrial at 0.
That's correct.
Okay.
You passed.
Wow.
Okay, I think we're making some good progress on this. So we'll bring this back, and I appreciate, like, Brian, I think a couple meetings ago helped by being like, let's just focus on this, right? Because we had the tourist homes, we had the hospitality homes, it was getting convoluted, so I think that was a good approach to take.
Jackie?
I'd like to be sure that we've had all the conversation necessary about an overall citywide cap on licenses. I think we danced around it, and I don't know that we finished that conversation. I would be in favor of one, and perhaps it's necessary to differentiate between existing licenses that are transferable and new licenses that are not transferable, and that eventually the balance of those might shift. But I think that if we want to put some power behind our support of long-term housing, that an overall cap is a really important way to do that.
Can I make a suggestion? Because as we're going through this in the letter from the city attorney, and the cap is going to be like that kind of hard cap would be a police power. And we could just add a letter that said that we are interested, or we can even say supportive, of adding a hard cap, but the legal complexities are something, because it's a police power ordinance, the legal complexities involved should be debated by the city commission.
Yes.
And
That's fine.
if I could add to that, you all know that there's a study session for the city commission coming up next month on police power ordinances that could be related to short-term rentals. And if there are any ideas like that you'd like Mitch or I to carry forward and advocate for, please let us know.
I think this is a perfect one to do that with.
And I think, so moving forward, we'll bring this back redline for the next meeting, which will be the 18th. All right, see how you feel about it once it's on paper. Then there still has to be a public hearing, so that'll be at the beginning of April at the earliest, maybe the second meeting, we'll see. So I say that to say you have time to formulate some of those additional considerations and to think about them that you want to send up that are tied to this topic, but not directly related to land use, more of the administrative side. That, I mean, if you're starting to talk about a citywide cap, I mean, that would be a prime topic to have a city commission ad hoc, because you got to get the legal, you got to get the licensing input from the clerk's office, you got to get the planning input. So, I mean, I don't think that this body in a meeting is going to be able to really adequately address that.
No.
And it's kind of outside the purview of the planning commission as well.
And it
But
would
to
take
make a
us
recommendation or a consideration is totally acceptable and encouraged. What
Yeah.
were you going to say, Brian?
It would take forever.
Yeah, well.
I mean, the response, look, and I understand, but we're, the city attorney works for the city commission directly, does not work for the planning commission directly. We're a little bit, our responses, while appreciated, tend to take longer to receive than what questions from the city commission take.
Truth.
So, yeah, I
It's
mean,
just the
we
reality
could
of
be,
how
yeah,
it's
I mean,
structured.
it just, yeah.
Yep.
Which, we're just one of many departments asking her questions.
Yeah, okay.
So it take us months to get through that, whereas city commission can get relatively, well, depending, but a lot faster.
All right, I want to say congratulations that we came up with these percentages. We've struggled with this for months. That's great. And what Sean has just said, anything more that you're interested to add on to this, send it in, and it'll come back to us at our next meeting, right?
Mhm.
Excellent. Is there any public comment on the short-term rentals?
Paul McCarthy, 401 Washington. I think a hard cap will just commoditize them so that a big investor will roll in and buy them all up at the front, and then they'll be more expensive, and it'll just turn it into an investor game. I just think the hard cap doesn't work, whereas the percentage approach actually acts as a carrot to incentivize development, where it helps, make it pencil out to be, competitive to build more units if you can have some of them earn more than others. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
To follow up on the penciling out, some of these buildings already have people purchasing them. They're under contract for these, knowing that the current use is they can short-term rent them. So if you make this decision, they'll likely back out of that contract if that's what their intended use was. And like the one that was on the funeral home, those are $1 million units. So some of those might be second homes, and then they'll rent them when they're not there. But that's a reason to purchase that one, is because you can short-term rent it when you are not there. Or some people might be investors and using it for that. But you're not going to get a long-term rental out of that, very likely, because you're going to have to pay $10,000 a month to stay there, and that's not sustainable. That's not something most people would do unless they're high corporate, which we don't have a lot of that in this town. So these people have already committed to purchasing these, and now you're coming in and saying you can't have that use. And same thing with the Gillis properties. They purchased those because they could short-term rent them. Some of them have flipped over to owner occupied, which is going to continue to happen. But the people that have purchased those, if you take that away, the price, the value of that property is going to go down, and so they will lose money. They'll lose $100,000 on the sale. So you are definitely affecting that as well. So I do see that being something that you could get sued for, because that was the intended use when they purchased it, and they were told this is the zoning, this is where we're at, and now you're coming through and affecting that zoning. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh. Justin?
Justin Reed, Traverse City resident. So with technology that was mentioned with the short-term rentals, is sometimes the state and municipalities cannot keep up with short-term rentals. It's a very gray area to police. So, and sometimes the law, excuse me, sometimes the state law doesn't reflect any kind of enforcement, and like I said, it's a very gray area. But there might be in the future laws that might be passed saying that the municipalities don't have control and the state has control over it, because it has been a big topic underneath the state house and state senate about ADUs and short-term rentals. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments about short-term rentals? Okay, we're going to move on to the annual report, but I want to announce we're going to take a short break after the annual report. So, yes.
Quick comment on the public comments. So properties that are already a use or existing use as a short-term rental, even if the zoning changes, they would still be a grandfathered, legally non-conforming use. So that wouldn't change. Even if they sell it, as long as the use continues. Until the use is abandoned, and that's a slippery slope on defining. We're not addressing the licenses here. Some people want to do that, but that's the legal question that gets into, that's beyond our pay grade here at the Planning Commission. So we're not going to address that. City Commission may address it, but I think it's probably won't happen. That's just my opinion, looking at some of the issues that the city attorney already brought up. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible. Anything that's currently being used once it goes into effect.
Yes.
And so the planning department doesn't issue the licenses. So we're not as familiar with the standards that they use, if it has to be constructed before it gets grandfathered in or not. I know on 12th Street, for instance, when this talk of reducing short-term rentals was occurring, across from Cone Drive, next to the former AC Delco, they built those buildings. He was going to build those as short-term rentals. So by getting the foundation in, he was vested, and he was able to draw his licenses and then move forward, even though there was a reduction. So he was able to put in that foundation before it went into effect. That dropped it down to 25% in that C2, so he was able to do the 100%. So there is a way that they're able to get their license before certificate of occupancy even. I don't think they can start renting it out until they get the fire inspection, which can only come after construction has occurred and things like that. But these are the type of questions that we don't manage in our department. So it becomes a little hard for us to speak to them, including the transferability and what the rules are for that. It's not what we handle.
Yeah, it's beyond our pay grade.
It is.
Those are questions for the city attorney.
So let's move on to the annual report, shall we? Okay, Mr. Winter.
Yep, so at our last meeting, we had this, what's that?
Oh.
After this. So at the last meeting, we adopted the goals for the year, which was the last piece that we needed to plug into the annual report. So Katie has gone ahead and done that. And really the only other change from what you've seen before is on page 2 or 3, it was where it talks about the planning and zoning department. On the right-hand side, it had the planning commission. That really wasn't enough space to fit your goals, so Katie moved them kind of towards the end, because the first part of the report is looking back, and as you get towards the end, it starts looking forward. So we thought that was an appropriate place, and I want to thank her for the completely inappropriate pictures that she decided to put of me going, you know. But, you know,
Well, I was,
planners like to point at maps. So
I
we
was
get excited about
receiving
it.
the map very well, it
Thank you,
seems like.
thank you. You could tell the passion.
From the back of my
Very
head.
genuine,
Yeah.
yes,
So we
yes.
call him Mr. Winter when he's teaching.
So it gets into that mode sometime. So with that, again, this is a legal requirement that a planning commission has a report created each year, kind of summarizing their accomplishments. So this is looking back at 2024, and that has to be submitted to the legislative body. They have in the past asked to also include that look forward. So not just convey what you've done, but what you might be working on. And so that's where we are here. So it's before you for adoption. Once adopted, we will submit it to the city commission.
Oh, so this requires a motion?
Yep.
Okay.
There's a suggestion.
I have one.
Then go for it.
Okay, great. Motion to approve the City of Traverse City Planning Department and Planning Commission 2024 Annual Report as presented.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there any comment on our annual report of the Traverse City Planning Commission? Hearing none, that we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. I'm sorry, I went so fast into the motion, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it. So I do want people to have their
Sorry.
chance if they want it.
Does anybody have anything to say about the annual report? Looks beautiful. I think it shows, we did a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot.
And I like, it is beautiful, Katie.
It
The
is.
pictures,
You did an
the
awesome job.
fonts,
Thanks.
the colors, it's great.
Any other comments?
Okay, sorry.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We are going to take a very short break.
If you are here for school and you need your form signed, we'll take care of you.
That was very nice of you, Sean.
You've put in almost your 2 hours, so.
More than that.
But we
Almost
encourage you to
two.
stay because there's
2 hours
there's
and
always more to
43
discuss.
minutes. I think
Sorry, I'm eating, but I'm going to face plant from low blood sugar. I haven't eaten since lunch.
I mean, theoretically, if you were in a very flooded state,
Yeah,
they could
right.
swim up the storm drain, but otherwise, they're not going to.
Yeah, that whole site, and I think
There's a storm
I
drain
was talking to this guy who did a lot of ice behind the scenes ice making, and we were dialed just to like our horn system we bought, you know,
Well, turtles can walk,
whole
ducks
system
can
is
fly.
complicated, but he said that they really
It is kind of cool out here. In the building, not up here. I'm fine up here. But like when you first walk in those doors, it's pretty cool.
But yeah, the thing, if fish came from Pitts Creek, they wouldn't swim. It would be more likely that a raccoon or something, or a heron caught them when they wandered away from the creek.
Oh my god.
If there are multiple and only happen during one window, I would go to somebody's bucket just fell off the window.
Yeah.
This is, when you consider how many,
Is somebody?
David.
David Knapp. Yeah, all right. We're waiting on Sean, and I think we can regroup. Oh, it's right there. Yeah, Mitchell, we're going to regroup. I'm putting on my best teacher voice, or mommy voice, or whatever the hell. Mitchell. Okay, Mitchell.
Jerry.
Oh,
Did you just call him Mitchell?
I did.
Yes. Mitchell.
Mitchell?
That's what it says.
I guess that's fair.
Getting a little punchy. Okay, are we all, no, we're waiting on you.
Jerry went somewhere.
Where did he go? Oh.
Gerald.
Gerald.
Geronimo.
Stop. We're also.
Oh, but now he knows that we're all
Come,
waiting
Gerald.
on him.
Okay.
Can we call you Geronimo?
We all regrouped?
Uh-huh.
All right, so we're going to move to new business, conceptual introduction of the special land use permit 25 SLUP 01 application to operate a year-round emergency shelter at the previously approved seasonal emergency shelter operated by Safe Harbor of Grand Traverse, Inc., located at 517 Wellington Street. Mr. Winter.
Yep, so this is a project that I think you've all been aware of for over a year now. We had a joint meeting back in February between the City Commission and the Planning Commission talking about this. At that time, you know, Safe Harbor already exists as a seasonal emergency shelter operating under a existing SLUP that has been amended a number of times. What they're proposing is to move to a year-round operation. This would technically probably qualify for a major amendment, but speaking with the city attorney, since we are somewhat changing that operational model, we thought it would be best moving forward just to do a new SLUP, just to clean the record to move forward. Procedurally, it's the same procedure, so it doesn't change anything. It's just the type of paperwork that we keep on file with that. So at this time, there's no increase in the overall capacity that of 90 beds at Safe Harbor. So the building is not being proposed to be enlarged. Some changes that you will see in the site plan is an additional parking lot to the east of the building, closer to their east property line. That parking lot was specifically cited at that location to accommodate a future expansion if need be. That, of course, would have to go back through approval as well. From an operational standpoint, I understand that Safe Harbor likes to keep guest parking and volunteer parking in kind of separate. A lot of their guests do in fact own cars, and so they do need a place to park. You can't park on the street overnight, so they're trying to accommodate that. They are required to have parking as well with an amount set by the planning director. And so when the previous SLUP was approved, the analysis was done based on the intensity of the use, and a number was set at 17. I believe it was 20. I am not in a position to recommend an increase in that since there is no increase in capacity, but they have voluntarily increased their parking to better accommodate the guest parking that they need. So that's the minimum of 20 that they would need. At a minimum, they would need to add about 4 more spaces because 4 of the original spaces got occupied by the yurt. So the yurt was installed temporarily as a measure to help with the COVID pandemic. It allowed isolation for those that needed it. It has since proved to be a benefit to their operation because sometimes in, crowded environments, people can feel overstimulated. They need a break from the population, and this provides that opportunity. They also have computer terminals if someone needs a quiet place to work on a computer. They also have a TV in there, so when people are resting, if they want to watch a game, they've used it for that purpose where some guests can go out there. So those 4 spots need to be accommodated, which is, and then some, with this new parking lot. At this time, we don't have the staff report done, so no action is required by the Planning Commission, but since we're looking at it right now, we thought it would be best to get it in front of you. And we do have Brad Gerlach from Safe Harbor here today. I'll turn it over to him shortly so he can ask any questions and provide more information beyond what we are discussing today. He was at the staff design team this morning, so we had the opportunity to talk about that. Frankly, there wasn't much to talk about because not much is changing on the site, and that's a lot of what we look at. So with that, before I turn it to Brad, I just want to recognize and acknowledge that some of you may feel in a unique position right now, right? Because this is clearly a project that the city and the city commission has been working on with Safe Harbor and the Coalition to End Homelessness for a while. So I just want to acknowledge that you may feel like you're being forced to go through this process and like, what does it matter? Because it's going to go to the city commission. They're going to make the decision at the end of the day. But this is the legal process, and your input is valuable and important. So again, please take that into consideration and know that you are seen and how you might be feeling right now. But we're all in this together as part of our community. So we'll go through all the actions necessary. So with that, I'll hand it to Brad to see if you guys have any questions to ask him, and maybe, Brad, if you want to start with an overview of anything I've overlooked at this time.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm Brad Gerlach. I'm the facility manager, among other things, at Safe Harbor. I won't go long into comments because we're approaching hour 3, and my 13-year-old is wondering where dinner is.
Oh, dear.
But yes, we are honored to be asked to kind of address, especially the seasonal emergency housing crisis that we're facing, and we're glad to partner with you, county, et cetera, on addressing that. So I'm happy to answer any preliminary questions you might have at this time.
Brian?
Yeah, Brian.
I'll ask you some questions since you've been sitting here for almost 3 hours. Go without answering any questions. You're like, why did I even come here?
I know.
Is the facility air conditioned?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, we have 2 new rooftop units.
Oh,
that we had put 'em
congratulations.
in last season during the season, so.
I know that was an issue for you, so I'm glad that's happened. Summer hours operation are the same as winter?
Likely no, because we will not be serving dinner, so we will open slightly later, probably 7 rather than 6.
But, I mean, people have to be in still by, is it
8:30.
9?
It'd be 8:30 in that
8:30,
case.
9.
Yeah. Check-in is an hour and a half generally is what we've done.
It's a sort of a off-the-wall question, and nothing to do with this approval, but now that you're opening this summer, are you worried about people using the facilities like a hostel? Travelers coming up? Has that ever been?
It's a fair question. It's certainly something we've discussed. It's been discussed with the coalition. I mean, yeah, that's not, we're aware Traverse City is a nice place to come to, and it's not cheap to rent a spot, so yes, that certainly is a consideration.
Yeah, it must be, I mean, it's not what your purpose is, not why you're there, but yeah.
Yeah, I think
I
one
could see where
night
it could be an
sleeping in
issue
the
for
men's
you.
sleeping area at chilly night might discourage that pretty easily, though.
Okay.
Well, it is D2. We are looking at allowing 25% short-term rentals.
We already do, so maybe, it's already allowed.
Yeah. Fundraising, that's for sure.
There you go. You got the capacity.
Any other questions?
I have one. I think Jackie Sand was up
Okay,
first.
Jen.
Oh, thank you. I noticed in the application that you will have an ongoing housing assistance program on premise. And you mentioned that you're collaborating with the Northwestern Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, great organization. And Are you also having ongoing conversations with the Community Cares Coalition, which?
Yes, yeah, we'll soon be signing a memorandum of understanding with them.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes, so those are
Are
continuing.
you able to give us any of the highlights of that, or is that
That would be
premature?
beyond my pay grade.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So this is not really a year-round question, but the adjacent property is owned by Safe Harbor, correct?
Correct.
The one that's being used for the parking lot. It also, the
The
to the
parking lot,
east.
the parking lot
To
is
the
actually on
east.
the parent parcel. It is on the shelter parcel.
Got it.
It is not
Okay.
on the other one.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. For those who don't know, if you go along Station Street, where the snow mountains are right now.
Which is what I was gonna bring
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
so if that dirt area, about halfway into that dirt area is the parent parcel, we call it the parent parcel with the shelter on it. There's an additional lot about halfway all the way down to side tracks then, so that's what we're talking about. So the new parking lot is totally on the shelter. what
It'll
we
be
consider
all
shelter
on the
parcel.
portion of that that is your owned parcel.
Correct.
And all the spots will just be over there.
Correct.
Perfect.
On that,
The snow mountain is just giant, so if people drive by it,
yeah.
it's jarring. So I
And
just wanted to call that
That
out.
was brought up at design team today, that the original agreement, and I talked to the city attorney after that, Brad, and she's aware of all this, so that'll get cleaned up at the city commission level, but there were some temporary terms on the parent parcel for snow storage, which will have to be cleared up to construct the parking lot and stuff like that.
Marina parking as well.
Marina parking, yep. So, that'll be worked out. You know, there are a lot of issues with where to store the snow. This year it became very problematic as we were way above average. But the DPS department has found a solution through about a year and a half of negotiating to lease space on airport-owned property. So when we fill up these places, or if we lose that capacity because of this parking lot, we already have in place the new locations for it to be hauled and stored. But we do try to fill up the in-town locations first because there's a cost associated with hauling. So anytime that we can reduce that, it saves the citizens money.
All I was gonna say, it's out of my pay grade and in my dad's, so it's not my problem. It's good to note, but not my problem.
Jerry?
Yeah, so what, in the off-season, I guess, so currently in the summer, the building, is it, because of this current slump, like, you can't use it at all? It just says, does it lock and stay empty, or, you know, I'm just wondering, is it completely not being used, you know?
I mean, that's when we do all of our work on it, right?
Right, so you're
Everything
able to
gets
get in there.
repainted, projects, et cetera, that's when all that happens. I'm not exactly thrilled with the idea that I don't get free reign to, like, you know, I have to redo the urethane on the floors. I'm still trying to figure out how that happens while we're open. But that's what would happen, yeah. If you went by on a summer's day, I would be there, usually some volunteers doing whatever project needed to be done. But otherwise, no, nothing happens.
Well, the SLUP amendment would merely allow the potential for year-round operation if funding doesn't come through, or for some reason you decide not to operate for 2 weeks in July. I don't see that as fundamentally violating the new SLUP. It's merely providing them a better tool that would allow for year-round operation, which is currently prohibited.
Yeah, because right now they're only, by the terms of their approval, allowed to operate October 15th to May 15th. And if I believe, historically, you've ended around April 15th, though?
Yeah, now we go to April 30th. It really depends on church support, candidly.
Yeah. Yeah, so this would allow them, but not mandate them that they go year-round, to your point, if I think that's what you're asking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you
All
so
right.
much for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yep.
You have something to say?
I would just say procedurally, the public hearing's been scheduled for the 18th. So the next meeting will be the public hearing on this. And it's only after the public hearing that the planning commission can make a recommendation. So, you know, that email I think was sent out by Katie, there is a timeliness to this because as we've been told by our manager, there is a strong desire to avoid having to close the shelter for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks to go through this procedural process, vacate everyone, and then provide them the opportunity to come back. So we are trying to move this along with that May 15th current closure deadline. And part of the reason we are in this tight timeline is just that these types of projects do not have their own revenue, so there was a funding stack that had to be acquired. So it was only after they got that last piece, the next day we got the application. So that was what we were kind of waiting on. And so again, thanks to the county for their support on that effort.
Thank you. All right, it looks, anything else? If not, we're going to move on to report. Oh, I'm sorry, public comment on this slot. Thank you.
Justin, I do really, this is, introductory, so this is, kind of in early stages. I do want to make it plain to clear, that if it becomes, up to where it passes the planning commission and it goes to the city commission, is one thing that I've always heard, and it keeps on happening every single meeting, is that, well, that might not be the right space for it. And then the question becomes, okay, where do you want it at? Well, we're in Traverse City area to put it at. Well, see, we can't find a place because there's not going to be anybody who's going to donate land, and there would have to be a zoning change somewhere else in the city. So unless those two conditions are met, I still say that it's going to be in the same location. But like I said, this is an introductory, first step. But I'd like to hear more from the CCC involved with this, because the Community Cares Coalition had already had something on in Garfield Township. Well, that didn't go through because it was a commercial zoning, and Garfield Township would go ahead and have to have a variance on the zoning out there. So whatever deal that Safe Harbor has with the CCC, I would like to hear more about that, because if it is money that's going to Safe Harbor, it shouldn't be going to another township. Thank you.
Any other comments about this Safe Harbor slip? Okay, hearing none. Now we're going to move on to reports. Update from the City Commission.
We've had several meetings since the last Planning Commission study session got canceled. We've discussed a lot of issues, from a partnership with the Housing Commission, or rather exchange of some of our property to allow a potential low-income housing development at the current Copy Central property. We've discussed housing on both Lot O and the city's Beutner properties. We've discussed this two-way two-way study on State Street, and that's being extended for 1 more year, not 2. We've discussed our ethics policies, and we are going to reevaluate how we make appointments to various boards. And I'm sure Jackie has some other things too.
I think you hit the highlights, and certainly the ones that were most relevant to the Planning Commission.
Oh, and West Front Street. We've had a couple discussions about the entrance to the city on the west side, between Madison and the city limits, how to keep cars from going off the road into houses.
Yes. All right, thank you. Any questions about that? Any public comment about that? Okay, we're going to move on to update from the Planning Department.
Yeah, so a couple things. There are some public engagement opportunities that have been kind of ongoing. The City Commission is working on their strategic plan. So on the city's website, we have a project page. You can see when upcoming items are there. I think the survey may even still be open on that one.
No, it closed 5 p.m.
Today?
On
February
28th.
Okay, so it had been extended, but now it's
Yes.
closed. Okay.
They got over the number they were hoping for.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Also, the DDA is going through a public design process right now for Rotary Square. They had some workshops last week, so.
There's a
but
survey
That
for
one
that
is still
too.
up.
that survey
That's,
is still open. I think that was in the Bay Brief Friday. I wanted to make sure everyone is aware that from 4 to 6 this Thursday, there will be an open house that planning will be assisting engineering on. It'll be in the training room for the 2025 street reconstruction project. So if your street is getting reconstructed and you want to get more information or see some of those designs, that would be a great opportunity to come and have direct conversation with staff here in the city. Internally, we are currently working on our budget. And I bring that up because every year we put money in the budget for the Planning Commission to attend conferences. We usually put enough in there for everyone, at least if they want to go to the annual state planning conference. This year it'll be October 22nd through 24th, so that's a Wednesday to Friday in Kalamazoo. It's a great opportunity to just hear from others throughout the state. We don't get a ton of takers on that. I understand it is during the work week for many, but for some reason when it's on Mackinac Island, everyone loves going. So that only cycles around about every 4 years. So please know, just kind of keep that on your radar. And I think as you all have been signed up for the Michigan Association of Planning, you should get the emails with their continuing education and programs. If any of those pique your interest, just let Katie know, because we can get you registered. We cover the cost for that. And one conversation that I am going to have with them, because our HR director brought this up as a suggestion, is putting in the budget so we can provide dinner before the meeting, since they're now at 6 o'clock, like Howard does. So I hope you like Jimmy John sandwiches, because that's about as creative as I can get. But Katie, on the other hand, she has all this great experience from City Academy and feeding people. So I think that's all I have. Do you guys have anything else? I know Leslie has been working very hard on our CDBG stuff, trying to get that through. Federal programs are complicated. Federal programs right now are even more complicated. So she has her work cut out for her. We're grateful for her.
Do you have any tales of the federal freeze to share with us?
Not really. They're pretty quiet about it.
Quiet because they've cut all their staff?
They're also prohibited from talking about a lot of things now. So.
But tomorrow we're having a stakeholders meeting with all of the service providers and all the likely suspects that we worked with last year, and this year with more information and kind of a little better idea of knowing what we didn't know last year. I think it'll be more productive, and hopefully we can get a couple years ahead of, with the planning, so that we can be a little more strategic. Right now, we're just trying to keep our heads above water, so.
Yep.
All right. Anything else?
I think that's it from us.
Thank you. Was there a Grand Traverse Commons Joint Planning Commission meeting?
There was in January, but we already talked about it.
The Board of Zoning Appeals did not have a meeting?
And has already been canceled for this month.
Yes, it has. And the Riparian Buffer Committee?
Nope.
All right.
It's
waiting.
Yeah,
waiting.
Leslie did send an email out to the members of that committee. It's just that CDBG with its timelines has took precedent, and we have a lot of community partners depending on that money, so we need to shift to prioritizing that.
Perfect. Is there any public comment about anything that anyone would like to make? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is James Reed, 2540 Orchard Circle Drive. One of the things that I heard throughout the meeting today is that this committee is very forward-thinking, they're open to new solutions, and are trying to set example as kind of like a trailblazer for other cities in Michigan. So I was wondering if the committee has ever considered the possibility of allowing for residential housing to be built on top of or in combination with commercial buildings, such as restaurants, shops, and the like. This would kind of incentivize long-term housing, as people who would want to set up a business here or would like to work here could basically live right on top of their place of work. It would also kind of get the ball rolling on trying to repurpose office spaces in some way, just kind of get that idea of repurposing certain buildings and adding on to buildings that already exist.
Thank you so much. Any other public comment?
Justin, just to piggyback on the mixed residential and everything, the Grand Traverse Commons is a great example of that. The old state hospital facility has businesses, commercial, and everything in it. I would say maybe use that as an example if you're thinking about doing anything in downtown with any other zoning around the city. I think the city has a identity problem because every single time I hear, well, we've got other cities who are looking at Traverse City, you know, they don't want to become Traverse City. Well, what do they want not to become Traverse City? I don't quite understand that. I guess, do they not want a thriving Traverse City? Do they not like the I don't know, the walkability of Traverse City? Do they don't want the identity of Traverse City being trailblazers? I mean, there's a lot of context that you can put along with, hey, you know, every other city doesn't want to be like Traverse City. What does that mean? So there's no answer, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, thanks everybody for putting up with this very long meeting. We knew it was going to be long, longest in our history, I think, over the last 3 years. Thanks everybody for being here, and have a good day. Evening. Eat dinner.
We
Thanks.
stayed longer
We
for
adjourned.
housing.
I like this color.
Some housing ones.
Yes.
I do like the 6 o'clock start.
Just to know,
Pretty
one
good.
of my clients is Jimmy Jones.
How's it
So
going with you?
I test their app.
Okay.
So if you ever find an issue.